By way of introduction, I'll briefly explain the purpose of the Board of Appeals to the audience. The city has adopted a set of zoning ordinances. If a property owner applicant wishes relief from a portion of the ordinance, state law provides for an avenue of appeal, hence the name Zoning Board of Appeals. The zoning board must find that 4 conditions exist in reviewing an application in order to grant a variance. If all 4 conditions are met, the board can grant an approval for a variance from the ordinance. The 4 conditions that must be met are extraordinary, exceptional circumstances which apply to this parcel and this parcel alone. Preservation of rights that a similarly zoned parcel would have. No detriment to the adjacent properties. The request is not of such general nature that the ordinance should be changed. Unlike a decision by the Planning Commission that must be approved or can be overturned by the City Commission, the decision by the Zoning Board of Appeals is final. There is no review or opportunity for overturning by the City Commission. The Zoning Enabling Act provides that Section 606(3), an appeal from this decision, a Zoning Board of Appeals shall be filed within 30 days after the Zoning Board of Appeals issues its decision in writing, signed by the chairperson, if there is a chairperson, or signed by the members of the Zoning Board of Appeals. If there is no chairperson, or within 21 days after the Zoning Board of Appeals approve the minutes of its decision. The court may affirm, reverse, or modify the decision of the Zoning Board of Appeals. The court may make other orders as justice requires. Having said that, is the first applicant ready, which is 962 Jones. Okay. Just got to review the minutes here of the last meeting, so I need a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve those minutes.
Okay, motion by Scott.
Support.
Support by Tom. Okay. Motion's approved. Also, the general public comment, there is a provision made to encourage the expression of questions and concerns regarding a non-public hearing items and issues not on the agenda. Speakers are asked to identify themselves by name and address. A maximum time of 6 minutes per person is required. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Okay, applicant for 962 Jones? Here? Okay. The applicant requests permission to continue to park his camper and pontoon boat next to his garage. He says he has no backyard. It's only 3 foot from the house to the rear fence. This is contrary to the following sections of the City of Walker zoning ordinance, section 94-470. Property description is 962 Jones. The property owner's name is Dale Turner. Address is 962 Jones. Applicant's name is same. Zoning district is A. Use of existing premises is single family. Previous appeals is none. Okay, exceptional or extraordinary circumstances that are exceptional or to this are applying to the property in question as to the intended use of the property that do not generally apply to other properties in the same zoning district. The applicant's response was that his house is right on the back property line. He says, I have no backyard. The only available fence space for my 2 recreational vehicles are in my side yard next to my garage. Preservation of rights, that such variance is necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of substantial property rights similar to that possessed by other properties in the same zoning district and in that vicinity. The possibility of increased financial return shall not of itself be deemed sufficient to warrant a variance. He lists out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 other properties that have been granted similar requests. I won't go through each one of them. No detriment authorizing such variance will not be substantially detriment to the adjacent property and will not materially impair the intent or purposes of this chapter or the public's interest. His response was there were large bushes on the side of his garage which helps shield the vehicles from surrounding neighbors. Not a general problem, that condition or situation which a piece of property or the intended use of such property for which the variance is sought is not of general or recurring nature as to make reasonably practical and formulation of a general regulation for such condition or situation. And his response was that vehicles are parked neatly in line with my garage and driveway, so they are not of a nuisance to my neighbors. And we have, looks like area photos, kind of a map of the zoning area, ordinance sections. And there was one letter of opposition. It was unsigned. And just says, as a neighbor of 962 Jones, I'm opposed to the variance request to store additional recreational equipment on the property such as described in the request. I believe that we have ordinances for a reason to keep our neighborhoods livable, clean, and inviting to all. Allowing a variance of this circumstance will only invite more requests, which will lead to more clutter and degradation of our neighborhood. Thank you for your consideration. It's unsigned, so. Okay, Dan, do you have anything to add?
Sure, and I'll just mention, the board received kind of late another letter from the resident at 950 Jones just last night, so that was added. And I'll go over that in my slides here too. So just the second letter of opposition, similar concerns to what you just stated. I'm sure most of the people in this room are not here for this first request, so we'll try to move things along as efficiently as we can, so thanks for your patience. I will start this off by kind of giving an introduction of what we do, and this applies to all three of the cases that will be reviewed tonight. We have a master plan in place that defines the kinds of land use that we want to see in different parts of Walker. Underlying that master plan, we have a zoning ordinance that gives specific regulations for different types of land use in the city. And the zoning ordinance is the...
We can't hear a word you're saying.
Okay, I will try to speak up and slow down and maybe turn towards the mic. Is that better? Okay, thanks. So we have a set of regulations that applies to every property based on the underlying zoning ordinance. So sometimes when people request relief from those zoning ordinance regulations, it comes about in different ways. As you'll see later tonight, there's a full site plan associated with the third request on the agenda. This first one is came about a little bit differently. From time to time, we get code enforcement violation based issues that we have to resolve one way or another. The best way to resolve those is through compliance. In this case, the compliance relates to where and how you store your recreational vehicles on a site. But if there's a desire to continue to park your recreational vehicle in a way that goes against the zoning ordinance, occasionally this board sees reviews for those types of requests. So this is a pretty small scale of request, but it relates to parking RVs on a single residential property. So as I mentioned, this, not unlike a lot of requests or a lot of issues that we see in the city of Walker pertaining to RVs, came about as a code enforcement item back in September. And what the code says in this image is maybe not the best way to show this, but what our code says pertaining to RV parking, which includes boats, campers, trailers, on lots less than an acre in area, you get to park one RV on the side of your garage, and you get to park one additional RV in your backyard. In this case, what's being requested is parking two RVs, that being a pontoon boat and a camper, both adjacent to the garage, and with one of them being, or actually both of these items extruding beyond the front plane of the garage, so such that part of it goes into the front yard. And that's the other ordinance standard that's being requested to be violated. So this bottom right image on this screen here is what what we were made aware of when there was a complaint. Both RVs parked in the side yard in front of the garage. And believe me that we get a lot of complaints about this type of item. This is not a standalone person who was necessarily singled out. We get a lot of code enforcement issues related to this, especially in the summer months. But as it stands, the applicant, I believe, would like to still request that he has the ability to park on the side of the garage up to two vehicles, and such that they extend past the front plane of the garage. And we'll go into why with the next few images. You can see the rear fence there. This is a photo I took recently. This is more in compliance than this image on the bottom right here, because you only see one RV. The other camper, I believe, is up away from the property right now. But you see that this being parked back pretty far into the site, it's still protruding beyond the front plane of the garage. It's a fairly narrow property. Here's another orientation. Corner lots are in a bad spot because of their orientation on two streets, meaning that they have two front yards, so you have even less room to work with items that you're normally supposed to keep in the rear yard. So that's a little bit of the background. So the ZBA is tasked with finding some facts on 4 different criteria used to judge variance requests. The first one is whether the property is exceptional or extraordinary in some way. I think there's a strong case to be made here that this is an exceptionally small lot. It's a very small corner lot relative to those around it. It's 40 feet in depth, and it being a corner lot is, of course, constricting as well. Here's where we get into a little bit more gray area, a little bit more nuance. The applicant has pointed out some other properties in the area. I haven't found evidence that these were granted variances in recent years. I need to dig a little bit more deeply to find more information on some of these observations. But my takeaway from this is that none of these are variance requests granted for RVs in a front yard or more than one RV on any given property. I did encourage the applicant to look for things like this in the vicinity where there might be some items stored in the front yard where we normally like them to be stored in the rear yard. Because at the end of the day, the ordinance intent is really to make sure your accessory items are behind the house, whether it's a recreational vehicle, a shed, some other accessory use, and are not the predominant use on the site. You don't want your single-family home being overshadowed by your accessory recreational item or your shed or your pool. So the intent would be the same whether it's a RV issue or something like a shed or a pool. So this is kind of a shades of gray on this criterion. There are no apparent variances that we've granted for RVs, and we've gone over this before. There are some other items I'd need to look further into to see whether these are lawful non-conforming, whether they were permitted before we had permits, before we had the zoning ordinance in place. And in some cases, these might be old variance requests that didn't come up in our most recent search, because we only have records online going back to '06. So those are some things with the items that are pointed out here where there may be some rights granted to similar properties in the vicinity related to accessory items in the yards. But the bottom line is that recently we have, as a board, you folks as a board have denied a couple of requests for RV-related parking variances. 3660 Richmond in January of 17 and 3080 Richmond in June of 17. And I think my next slide will show why that is. I think that one of the things that you're looking at is that we regularly enforce on this item. This is a 2016 kind of dot density map of where we've had code enforcement actions against RV parking in the wrong spot. And what this means is red dots are where we observed RVs, usually in the summer months, parked for more than 48 hours in a non-compliant location. So we regularly enforce on this. We never, to my knowledge, grant leniency from this requirement. And that's why setting a precedent would be something we'd try to avoid with any request like this. So from a no detriment standpoint, this is the third of 4 questions you have to answer. The detriment in this case being whether there's a detriment to the intent of that ordinance And the intent of that ordinance is to make sure that properties are aesthetically appealing and that accessory uses don't overshadow principal uses. And I just ask you to consider what this would look like if this was replicated on a number of different sites throughout Walker. If you see every lot on a block have 2 RVs on the side of the lot next to the garage on small lots. And if you had a number of lots where the RV was parked in the front yard. So imagine this is just an image I took from Elgin, Illinois online, but you see examples of stuff like this all over Walker in the summer months too. So just imagine what it would look like if this was replicated on many lots. And so I don't think the no detriment criterion is met because I think that there is a visual detriment to having this type of situation replicated on a lot of lots. And what can support this no detriment criterion, the chair referenced the letters that were sent. There are 2 letters opposed to this variance request. Sometimes these letters include some justification for or against a case, and I think some of the folks here for the third case tonight have letters in place that are meant to kind of highlight some of this no detriment aspect of what you're reviewing. So it's just important to acknowledge these letters, see if there's any merit to them based on the intent of that ordinance being making sure the properties don't have accessory uses that overshadow their principal uses and aren't aesthetically inhibited by what's being proposed. And the last one is whether it would make more sense to delay this and have the ordinance committee take a look at leniency for RV parking. We've sort of tossed this around before, but I don't think that this is appropriate, so I don't think this criterion should really play a role tonight. I don't think there's a need to table this review based on a need to update our RV code to allow more RVs. This is a unique request and it can stand on its own. So my recommendation, and this is up to the board to look at and to hear out the applicant and their pitch for this case, but just simply because we haven't granted this type of variance before, there's not really a apples to apples comparison of a preservation of rights for either variance request. And there's also not a strong case that there wouldn't be a detriment by kind of opening up this Pandora's box. I think that it'd be appropriate to deny both variance requests. I will say that if there's an inclination to grant either one, that you need to make sure there are strict limits in place to go back to what's the root of the intent of that ordinance. Visually appealing residential properties that are not overshadowed by their recreational vehicles or accessory uses. So I think imposing standards along the lines of making sure nothing extends beyond, say, 5 feet past the front of the garage, those would be appropriate types of conditions to put in place. But I still think you have trouble meeting the preservation of rights and no detriment criteria to grant the variance. That being said, I should get out of the way and let you hear from the applicant and any neighbors that are here.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I need a motion to open the hearing.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Sandra,
I'll support.
supported by Scott. Reading this down. Okay, with that, the applicant for 962 Jones, you want to step up to the microphone? Hi. Hearing all that, do you have anything to add to what we've?
Well, what I wanted to say was that the picture that you showed up there, that's the first day that I brought the camper home. So it's sticking way out because I was going through it and checking everything out. I don't know if you have pictures after that I gave to Dan, where the camper sets, the fold out is in and the camper's all the way back to the fence. And I did have a couple of pictures with both recreation vehicles almost behind the garage. They're probably sticking out 3 feet. And I have a grape and trellis in the back, which I cut out and took out so the camper and boat will go back even farther. So you're talking about 3 feet that the camper and boat will stick out from the garage. And the garage sets back about 10 feet behind the house.
Okay.
I can jump in, Mr. Chair. I should mention, Mr. Turner's pictures do appear in your packet towards the end, and I think I put numbers on a table of contents without actual page numbers on the pages in this case, so that might be a little confusing. But if you flip towards the middle of your packet, you should see his pictures in there, so we did get those to the board members.
Okay, thank you.
This chain link fence, is that on your property line?
Yes.
Okay, I'll open up questions to the board.
What's the overall length of the trailer from the very back to the very nose of the hitch? And also, what is the overall length from the back of the boat at the engine, outboard, all the way to the hitch?
I believe 27 feet. With the motor on the pontoon, it makes it the same length as the camper.
What's the depth of the garage from front to back?
I believe 25 feet. And then you got another 3 to 4 feet behind the garage to the fence.
This the first year you stored those next to your garage, or is this,
The camper, yes, the pontoon, I had that there last summer.
okay, so you just bought the camper this year?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Do you have it stored all year round, or is it off-site in winter, or either the camper or the pontoon?
Well, right now, the camper is up in the woods because I'm deer hunting. I bow hunt for the whole month of October, and now I'm going into deer hunting, and that's where I have it parked right now.
Okay, but when you're not using it, is it always at your house?
It will be, yes. I do keep my place up very nice, and I put a lot of time and money into this house. I bought it as a foreclosure, and I made it look really nice, and I keep up on it every day, every week.
Okay. Were you aware of the ordinance?
No, sir,
until-
I wasn't.
Okay.
Just seeing places throughout Walker a little bit, I didn't realize there was ordinance and rules. Otherwise, I could have maybe got a smaller camper. But I didn't know the rules.
Have you thought of like a storage place?
Yes, I have, but it's not in the budget.
Okay,
I got these items for when I retire. I'm in transition of retiring. When I retire, I won't be able to afford these things, so I'm getting them now so I can enjoy my retirement. And I like to hunt and fish and camp.
okay. Any other questions?
When, in the summer or any other month, when I drove down the street, I didn't see any houses in the area, 2 blocks that had 2 recreational vehicles on there. Do you have any instance that you can cite where there's 2 recreational vehicles stored?
I haven't noticed, no. I didn't really go look.
Okay,
I just pretty much mind my own business.
sure.
I've seen some areas that looks pretty rough and not very pleasant, but like I said, I mind my own business. But I do keep my place nice and neat.
Anything else for the applicant? All right. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to the variance? Okay. You could state your name and the address for the
Oh,
record.
my name is Mary Mazinski, and I'm on 2227 Gaynor.
Okay,
So I'm just, I guess, across the street from the side of his house, Mr. Turner's house.
okay,
I just wanted to say that he does keep his property up very well. When the camper and the boat are pushed back, I mean, he even took a tree out, everything to make room for these. You know, they're lined up, they're nice and neat, they're, you know, it's not like he's got stuff all over the yard. Like, you know, you look at other neighbors, like 2 houses from him, and they have 4 cars in their front yard, you know, and a bunch of them in the side. Or, you know, the dump truck in the front of the house. I mean, his is actually a lot better than that. So it could be worse, but he does keep it up really nice.
okay. Thank you. Anything else?
What's the width of the pontoon?
That is about 10 feet, I believe.
About 10 feet?
Maybe 8, I'm not sure.
And both RV or recreational equipment there, they're both about 27 feet in length?
Yes, sir.
And your garage is not quite 27 feet in length?
No, sir.
He said it was about 25.
Yeah. My God.
When those two items are pressed back for storage to put them next, how much room do they stick out from the garage?
About 3 feet,
About 3 feet?
yes.
Okay.
See, part of the issue is that the variance actually follows the property, so if you were to leave and someone else comes along, they might not keep it up as well as you and stuff, so we have to really look into the future as well, not just with you, so that's part of the issue. Anything else from the board?
Well, I think it's very difficult, that lot. I mean, that's just not right. You know, there's no backyard. It's a corner lot. It's really difficult to even have a backyard, let alone store anything in it. So it's a real difficult situation because you can't enjoy what everybody else on that street enjoys. And yet here we are, you know, because of the way, but yeah, that, he can't do anything about it because it's just not, he doesn't have everything that they do. However, we definitely have we do have to protect the city from this becoming, we can't set a precedence, but I mean, it's just tough because we've never done this before, and I'm not sure we want to do it. I can't speak for you guys, but not sure that I want to do it, even though I really do understand the difficulty that he has here. It's just not right, but. I mean, what's his front, I mean, his house is 40, the lot's 40 feet deep, right, Dan?
Yeah.
So, I mean, really, all the setbacks and everything on this whole lot are non-conforming,
whole
right?
thing.
The whole blasted thing, I mean, for whatever, but that's what happened.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, it's an old plat pattern, and maybe there may have been other lots that are like this that got combined into two into one, and so there might be some that are double the size on corners, but this one is pretty constrained. Probably was more typical with this era of housing too, but then the new ordinance comes in on top of that, and this rule was made in the late 80s, so it may have been more framed for properties that were coming online at that time. So there are two requests. One is 1 or 2 RVs. I think we can rule out that anything could be stored in a rear yard here. So the one request is 1 or 2 RVs in the side yard, and whether they can be stored such that the front goes beyond the front of the garage. You can take the information you have and deny, approve, or table. You can always table if you want to get some more information. I will say this time of year, I think we're sort of in a holding pattern. I think we're at a pretty good place in terms of enforcement progress and code compliance progress. The applicant has taken steps to come closer into compliance, so if there's a need to hit the pause button, get more information, you can do that. But if you think you have enough to act on with both of those requests tonight, I encourage you to do that.
Is there any way that you could move these back farther so there isn't that 3 foot in front of your garage?
I did.
Or is it all the way back as far as it'll go?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else from the board? Okay, can I get a motion to close the hearing?
I'll make that motion.
I'll support.
By Sandra, support by Craig. All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting's closed. Okay. Your thoughts?
So I have a couple thoughts on it. I can appreciate absolutely the inability to have a recreation vehicle that's any longer than 25 feet. That would, and to be able to store that. So I see a need for some type of potential variance to allow that to protrude, at least one vehicle to protrude somewhat in front. However, I struggle with allowing more than one vehicle because of its stickiness to the property in its continuation. And as I drove by, right, it is a well-kept property. The challenge is that not all the neighbors have a well-kept property. You can even do a quick aerial search from the last Google images and you see boats in the front yard, which is just disappointing, right? So I see a need to have some type of variance which allows the protrusion of at least one recreational vehicle. It's disappointing there is no backyard, but I don't like the idea of having multiple vehicles stored next to a property. And I think that ordinance is one that we should continue to keep throughout the city. That's my personal opinion as I look at the uniqueness of the property. Those are my thoughts and comments. I don't know if the board agrees or disagrees, or I'm open for conversation on that.
Anyone else?
I would tend to agree with Craig on that. And perhaps granting a variance for one vehicle, understanding the circumstances of the length of that vehicle, allowance of a few extra feet for that vehicle. Multiple vehicles, it's a small lot, it's a tight neighborhood, and I think it might crowd, just that crowding feeling.
Okay. Anyone care to make a motion?
So I'll make a motion.
If I can just jump in, I'm sorry to.
Go for it,
start
Dan.
The flow here. There are two requests here, so I would actually encourage you to do two different votes, even though there's only one line for the votes.
Okay.
And
So the first one will
findings are
be on the
same.
two vehicles.
That's right. Yep.
Okay.
And then the second one would be the protrusion into the front yard. And then if you agree with the findings that were presented, you can just refer to them as presented.
Okay. So this motion will be on the two vehicles.
Yep, so I'll make the first motion. I'll make a motion to deny the request for a dimensional variance to park two pieces of major recreational vehicle equipment in the side yard adjacent to the garage, contrary to section 94-470B2 of the Walker zoning ordinance, which prohibits parking more than one piece of major recreational equipment in the side yard on a lot under 1 acre in an area. And then I would, want to make that first vote on that one, and we'll do it on the second one?
Yep, and I need support.
I'll support that.
Supported by Pat. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Randy? Okay. Randy was opposed, everyone else was. Okay. That's denied to have two vehicles in your side yard for the reasons that we've kind of expressed, so. On the second variance for extending into the front yard,
I'll make a second motion on that one. I make a motion to approve the requested dimensional variance to allow the recreational equipment to extend beyond the front yard of the adjacent garage, contrary to section 94-470B3, which does not allow any piece of recreational equipment to extend farther toward the street than the closest adjacent portion of the building next to which the equipment is parked and stored, which does not allow more than one piece of equipment to be stored within the side yard of any lot at any one time, with the specific limitations to be no more than 5 feet of that variance.
okay,
I'll agree with
support,
that. I'll support that.
support by Sandra. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Scott, opposed? Everyone else? That one is granted. So,
With conditions, right?
With condition.
yeah, with the condition that it goes no more than 5 foot. Okay?
Sandra.
Okay, and I'll need your signature up here
Right
with
up here
with Tammy.
by Tammy.
Amy right there.
Dale, feel free to come by our office, we can brainstorm whenever you. Brainstorm about the second. No, the second one is denied, so. Well, for more than, actually, yeah, you can't have anything in the second RV in the side yard. Right, yep.
Let me get your signature, and then I'm gonna, can I just email this to you, because there's a lot to write on there, so you can just sign right there, and then I'll email a copy to you. And I'll send a copy to you, all right? Thank you.
Only if you need to talk about how you're gonna phase that second one out. But if you're okay till next summer, then sounds like you're in good shape. Okay, thanks.
Okay, is the applicant for 1587 Harding here? Okay. The applicant hereby requests permission to install a 6-foot privacy fence at the lot line along Bristol Avenue to replace a chain link fence that has been removed. The fence will be placed from the back edge of the house, which will allow 100 feet of clearance from the corner of Bristol and Harding. The above is contrary to the following sections of the City of Walker zoning, 94-337, which is the fence ordinance. Property description is 1587 Harding Northwest. The property owner's name is Michael and Deborah Mick. Same address, applicant's name the same. Zoning is SA, use of existing premises, a single family, no previous appeals. Okay. Exceptional or extraordinary circumstances that are applicable are the applying to the property in question as to the intended use of the property that do not generally to the other properties in the same zoning district. The applicant's response would be that they would like to install this fence to gain some privacy and noise abatement from traffic along the Bristol Avenue sprinkler system, which is already installed along the lot line. Preservation of rights, that such a variance is necessary for preservation and enjoyment of substantial property right similar to that possessed by other properties in the same zoning district and in the vicinity. The possibility of increased financial return shall not itself be deemed sufficient to warrant the variance. Applicant's response was, we feel that the fence will increase the value of our property and allow us to better utilize our backyard and gain some relief from the increased traffic on Bristol Avenue. No detriment authorized in such a variance will not be a substantial detriment to adjacent property and will not materially impair the intent or purposes of this chapter or the public interest. Applicant's response was the fence will be far enough from the corner of Bristol and Harding so as not to obstruct the view of drivers. There is a wooded area directly across the street from the proposed fence, so it will not block the view of other residents. Now, the general problem that the condition or situation of the piece of property or intended use of such property for which a variance is sought is not so general or recurrent a nature as to make the reasonably practical of the formulation of a general regulation for such a condition or situation. the applicant's response was that the fence will be at least 100 feet from the corner, will not be installed across from the residence. Also, the fence will match the fence already installed along the east line and will increase our property value. Okay, we have some aerial pictures. Of where it's at. We have estimate from the fence consultants and kind of a map of the zoning area. Can I hear a motion to open the hearing?
I'll make a motion to open the hearing.
Motion by Pat,
Support?
support by Scott. Dan, do you have anything to add?
Sure, I'll run through these slides more quickly because we got up to speed on the process with the last one. Here's the request. You have a map, I think submitted maybe with some assistance from our desk by the applicant showing where they'd like to have a privacy fence. On this image, you can see kind of a thick line extending from the, I'll say, top left or northwest corner of the house towards that northern property line. That is the permitted location of a privacy fence. The desired location of the privacy fence at this site is all the way out toward the front lot line on Bristol Avenue. So this type of request is not that uncommon on a corner lot. We hear requests for where you can put privacy fences, and it gets more confusing on corner lots. Let me jump ahead to this slide. This is what our ordinance says, and it's still not all that clear, even though it's kind of in a cartoon simple type of view, it's still not always clear. A corner lot has two front yards, and so when you have a rule that says privacy fences need to be in the rear yard or side yard, you have to then set back kind of an L-shaped envelope from the corner to keep that front yard clear. So in this case, you can see the orientation, this was just a couple days ago, the orientation of the site, you can see the area that they want to fence in, and they have fenced in the past with a chain link fence. So again, not too uncommon of a request on a corner lot to do something like that. But our ordinance reads a little bit differently. You have to keep that area clear. And it's a bit of a stretch, but I will say the intent of this ordinance is pretty similar to the last one. You want to make sure that there's a appealing and approachable interface between the public realm and the residential property in residential zoning. So and what that means is to have a kind of a clear view into the yard and to have no walls boxing out the public, using the sidewalks, using the roads from what should be the front yard. Certainly appropriate in the rear yard, but from the standpoint of somebody using the sidewalk or using the neighborhood, biking in the neighborhood, a lot of privacy fences kind of in your face is a bit of an aesthetic nuisance. So that's kind of the intent of that ordinance. Similar to the last case, you have a pretty restricted corner lot. In this case, it is a larger lot. There's about 4,600 square feet available in the permitted location for a privacy fence. So it's a little bit larger. It is still a corner lot that has that restriction I just talked about. For preservation of rights, that's your second question. Have you granted anything similar in the past? Well, this board, the folks sitting up here, most of you probably haven't, at least not that I could find. Most recently last year, and that should say 10/27/2017, we had a request on Ripens that was denied. That was a privacy fence that was actually built and then was kind of caught through enforcement because we don't permit fences in Walker. We rely on people to come to us and ask what they're supposed to do. And that one was right up against the road. It was very clearly on the front lot line, both functionally and literally by the survey. In this case, I think there's a bit more of an envelope back from Bristol Avenue before you get to what's considered the front lot line. But regardless, you go back in time a little further and you see a couple of other examples where there were some close calls. There were some variances granted for privacy fences in front yard areas. In one case, it was a lot without street frontage. So every request is a little bit different. So I guess you can look at the different requests that have been granted, and I ask you to look specifically at the merits of this case and this site, but to use these as a reference point. No detriment, again, I think there's an aesthetic, neighborhood character issue. This is actually, I think, meant to be an advertisement because it's a nice fence, but this is an example of what does it start to look like if you have a block of privacy fences in front yards. Kind of a personal example, this is around the corner from where I grew up in a different town. Doesn't look that bad, but, and you can even see the beware of dog signs on there now, but biking home from the bus stop as a kid, there's a little Yorkshire Terrier that would always just surprise me and bark his head off, and I never knew where he was coming from. So with a privacy fence, you have that kind of unpleasant, unfriendly interface in the public realm that you should try to avoid in residential areas, at least avoid replicating on a lot of sites. And for not a general problem, I think that this is a unique request. I would say 90 to 99 times out of 100 that we have people ask us where to put fences. They understand once we show them the picture, we draw the picture, Tammy, Sherry, and I, and they are able to find a way to comply, and there's a good purpose for this ordinance. So I think this is not an ordinance that we would be justified in changing to allow privacy fences in the front yard. So my recommendation is that, unfortunately, I think there is still that no detriment issue, that unless there's some statements by the applicant, some findings by the board, which you certainly might have, that no detriment issue is still a sticking point, so there would be justification to deny the variance on that claim. But then again, there's kind of ambiguous preservation of rights. There have been variances granted in unique cases in the past. So you may conditionally approve, deny, or table if you want some more information. Some other options to consider are that you could have a up to 4 foot tall see-through fence like there was before. You can have up to 3 foot tall, more of a decorative fence. You can have berms and landscaping. So those are all things that would comply with the ordinance and allow you to use the backyard in relatively the same way that they're desiring to have with some privacy back there. So just some things to consider. It's up to the board whether you would like to, which way you'd like to go. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
Dan, can you put that picture back up of the house? Thank you.
Okay, applicant for 1587 Harding, can you step to the podium? You state your name and address.
My name is Deborah Mick. My husband and I have lived in that house on the corner there since 1973. And I have the nicest house on my street because we've put a lot of money in it. And I have, over the years, been extremely frustrated with Walker. It costs $3,500 for us to fence the east side of the yard because the woman living there has not raked a leaf, or it's a nightmare. And I couldn't stand looking at it anymore. And the traffic down Bristol, since the speed limit was raised to 45 miles an hour, cars are going down that street 60 miles an hour, and they zoom around the corner onto Harding and keep right on going just as fast. So we were hoping that by putting a fence, a taller fence, the chain link fence had been there since we moved in, and it was rusty and it was really looking bad. So that's why we had it removed. But we would like to get some relief from the traffic. We're not going anywhere. We've lived there a long time. And I don't think by putting $8,000 in fence around my yard is going to raise my property value $8,000, but I'm hoping I'm going to get $8,000 of enjoyment and privacy out of my yard before I die.
Okay,
my husband and I went for a bike ride, and we had lived in the apartments there by 4 Mile in Alpine, and we went for a bike ride, and there was an open house, and I was tired, and we went in and looked at the house. And the realtor was not nice to us. I think he thought, 2 kids riding up on bikes, and my husband had his army jacket on, and in those days, people weren't very nice to veterans. Finally, Mike would ask him a question, and he was really rude. Now I would have went home and called another realtor, but we were young and stupid. And finally, he said, "Do you have any money?" And we did. And then all of a sudden, let me show you the finer points of this house, right? So, and we've been happy there. We've lived there a long time, and we're not going to move.
Okay. All right. Well, anything else to add, or I'm going to open it up for questions to the board, if you're ready?
I've talked to all my neighbors. None of my neighbors care. In fact, they think it's going to look nice.
This chain link fence in the back, is that your neighbors or yours? The chain link fence in the back?
The chain link fence, okay, what happened was, that's my fence. And when we bought that house, there wasn't a house behind us. That was vacant. And when they built that house, I complained to the city, and they told me too bad and too sad. But when they bulldozed, they left like a wall of sand. And there is a good foot of that fence in the backyard that's buried because of the sand that washed into my yard. And I would love to get privacy fence along the back, too. I think it would look really nice. But I talked to the fence guy about it. I'm afraid that if we removed that fence, the ground would keep on sliding, right? Mm-hmm. That fence is holding those people's yard out of mine. I've not had good luck with you guys. There should have been some kind of retaining wall or something. They didn't. I mean, I couldn't believe the sand. Every time it rained, more and more sand washed into my yard. So I'm kind of stuck with the chain link fence in the back. I'd have to get another variance to be able to leave that chain link fence and put a privacy fence.
Board have any questions?
Have you obtained a survey as part of the investigation into the fence?
I'm sorry, what?
Have you obtained a survey of the property lines?
The original stakes were still in the ground from when we bought that house, when we put that first fence up. So what they did was, when they came on the other side to put the fence, they put it right in the same place. It's right on the lot line on the east side. And I believe it was right on the lot line on the west side as well. And they'll put it in the same place. The fence in the back is just inside our lot line.
So I have a question for you, the applicant. The noise, the road noise that you hear.
Oh, I would love to have you come over in the warm weather for lunch, and I will let you eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich on my patio, and you can listen to the traffic. And the traffic isn't only heavier, it's aggressive. And that school, that charter school up on 3 Mile, oh, thank you very much for approving that mess. you know, they advertise at school as sending your children to school in a nice rural environment, but it's ruining the rural environment for the people who are paying taxes there. It's horrible. They all have to be picked up and taken to school and picked up in the afternoon.
Okay, my question is, this road noise, is this something that you have an issue with when you're in the yard, outside, on your deck? Or is the road noise when you're in your house, windows closed?
Oh, my windows rattle.
I guess that was my question is.
Yeah,
I
it's
wanted to know
noisy.
whether you have this noise when you're just
When it's a-
outside on your deck or patio versus I'm sitting in my living room and the dishes are running off the cabinet or whatever.
Oh, yeah, it's bad. It's bad. And I honestly, I can't believe that there haven't been some accidents. That is a 2-lane road, almost exclusively residential all the way to 4 Mile Road. And no sidewalks, no sidewalks. The people that live across the street from me on Bristol, their mailbox is on my side of the road. And you can't get across that road because of the little hill. And you look and there's no one coming and you're halfway across the road and somebody's on top of you because they're speeding.
Randy, I'm familiar with that area because I used to drive down Harding, taking the back roads to get to my dentist. And the traffic there is horrendous.
On a residential road on Harding, there should never, ever in a million years be as many cars going down our street as there is, without some speed bumps, without something. And when I have called and talked to a policeman, they only have 3 policemen on duty on each shift, and they all have to stay up on Alpine because of the traffic. And I said, thanks. There's an accident all the time. And so everybody is trying really hard to stay off of Alpine, and they're zooming down Bristol.
Is there a reason why you would need to have a 6-foot-high fence?
Well, it's going to match my other side, and 4 feet is not really that tall. That's what our chain link was, and it's not really that tall. And now I think it's going to look funny. It's going to look weird if I have it on one side taller than the other. Because when we did this, I didn't know I needed a variance until the fence guy said to me that I needed to get a variance. And he also told me that in Grand Rapids, for this kind of variance, they get them all the time, the application fee is only $30.
Dan, do we have a picture of the other side of this, what the fence looks like on the other side?
I don't think there's a good one in these slides, unfortunately, but why don't you hold that thought, I'll pull up something from Connect Explorer here.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask Dan a question?
You sure can.
Okay, so Dan, in the screening world, because you have experience, right, previous experience in landscape and stuff?
A little bit.
Okay,
Not
a
so
little
much
bit.
with fencing.
So in your brief past, screening with fences versus screening with landscaping and sound deadening things,
Oh,
is
there's
one
not
better
gonna-
than the other or not?
There's not going to be much help with the noise from the fence.
I think it would also depend on when it grows in. So you're gonna have
Okay.
a growth period, and you have to make sure whatever you plant, whether it's arborvitae or wood cedar, they would have to kind of grow in and fill in.
Mature.
Okay,
But nothing is gonna be as soundproof as a
okay,
wooden privacy fence.
okay.
Where are you installing the 8-foot wide gate?
I'm sorry, what?
Where are you going to install the 8-foot wide gate?
So that our yard guy can get in there. I don't think it's going to be, I don't think it's going to, is that what the estimate says, an 8-foot gate?
Yes.
I don't know about that. But we need one big enough to be able to get we have lawn service that comes and cuts the grass. What we had in the chain link fence was 2, 3 foot. And I was thinking about going like that. We don't need an 8-foot gate.
Do you think there'd be any easements there, Dan, on that, on the Bristol side?
My inclination is there would not be, and that was not part of my research with this request, although it should have been. I don't see any pattern that would indicate a stormwater easement, and I haven't seen any on any maps yet.
Has there been a traffic study on Bristol and Harding lately?
20 years ago,
There was a traffic study south of the railroad. I think it stopped short of this far north on Bristol.
So the fence on the north side is chain link? Is that what we're seeing? Is that,
Is the fence on the north side chain link?
Yes.
Yes.
okay.
Do we have any dimensions? I mean, what kind of space do we have from the end of the house to Bristol, property line on Bristol?
my whole backyard before was covered in 310 feet of fencing. From the back side of the house, around, up, down, and back to the back of my house, 310 feet.
Chain
Yeah,
link.
but it's a huge yard. It's deceiving when you look at the picture because it's a hill. It's a hill that goes around the corner. Yeah, it's a really big backyard. When we used to, when we were young and poor, and we cut that grass ourselves, it took 3 hours of constant
Thank you.
pushing because it's a huge yard. We were young and stupid. What?
So, looks like where they had the chain link fence would have been close to, or where their wall is right now is close to that 35-foot front yard setback.
Okay.
Space they'd gain.
Thanks.
So it would go from the side of the garage out? Is that, am I seeing that right?
I think they had it actually starting back here, is that right?
Yeah.
In the back of the garage.
Okay.
Yeah, it's going to be at the end of the house. That's where we had the fence before.
So it really wouldn't affect the noise level in the front of the house then?
Well, what I was thinking is if I'm able to get the fence, then my next project will be a little deck.
When they did do a study on our street, and I thought it was 20 years ago,
There were
2,000 cars going down
2,000
our
cars.
street every day. And they wouldn't even put speed humps in the streets.
I'm surprised. There's little children, and kids waiting for school buses, and there's little children on that street. There always has been. And I'm surprised that there hasn't been something bad happen.
Well, and you got the high school down there too, so
Oh,
that
yeah.
probably adds to
We're
the,
in between, yeah, and
I can't get on to Bristol some days if I leave somewhere around between 8 and 8:30. Because between the cars going to West Catholic and the cars going to the other school on 3 Mile, they are blocked up past past Harding. So what have I got? 20 cars I gotta wait for to get under the viaduct just to get out of there.
and there's no sidewalks. Somebody's gonna get hit, on Bristol, too. It's a dangerous situation that really needs to be addressed. But that's a whole other issue. I just want my friend.
any other questions?
I have a question for Dan. Dan, had the chain link fence not been removed and it was there, would this have been a ordinance violation or no?
No. I'm sorry, what was the height of the chain link fence before?
4 feet.
It's 4 feet. No, it wouldn't have been. You can have up to 4 feet chain link fence.
And I put
Small
that in
gauge.
the year I moved in.
Yep.
So it's been there.
Yep.
And it was looking bad. It
Yep.
was looking bad. It was, you know, old and rusty. It was time for it to be removed. And I thought we would remove it and just put a fence until the fence guy said, oh, you can't do that. And up the street from me, and I don't know what corner.
Bristol.
On
It's a
Bristol.
block this way.
That street that goes right in, so it's behind the fire barns there, right on that corner, those people put up a privacy fence. And then I think they may have done it themselves. If you do it yourself, they wouldn't have gotten any solution, right? My the fence contractor won't do it without a variance.
Deborah, can I ask you the question is the major concern privacy or sound?
Privacy, really. I think privacy more than, because I don't think it's gonna probably help the noise a little bit, but not appreciably. But if I don't have to see all those 4,000 cars going down Bristol every day, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Sure.
Why don't I deserve to live in a quiet, I mean, our taxes, Walker is not a cheap city to live in. Between the income tax and we have city water, we have Grand Rapids Water, we pay a lot for our water. And the taxes are not cheap.
So Dan, do we have that picture, that front picture again of the, looking at the front, and I'd like to see the topo of the left-hand side of their property.
There you go.
So that is elevated, right? I mean, it goes up to Bristol. So what's the problem with putting a 4-foot fence up there? It's elevated anyway. At some point, and they can do that, right?
The difference is that you can't have an opaque fence. And
So we can't do
3
it.
feet. There's 3 different layers of regulation. If you have a fence that you can't see through, it can only be an ornamental low fence, so 3 foot tall or lower.
But if we wanted to say, look, because of that, we could give them that variance,
What?
right? For a 4-foot fence?
Yeah, but I don't
Non-opaque,
want a 4-foot
or-
fence.
Well, it kind of
A
depends on
privacy
how the
fence?
request was stated too. I see this as 6 foot tall privacy fence in the required front yard. So if that's part of what they'd be willing to ask for and you'd be willing to grant, reducing that to 4 feet instead of 6, it would still have to be a variance.
Right,
But yeah.
okay. But I mean, because I guess I can't see a 6-foot privacy fence up there. That just doesn't work for my mind, for multiple reasons. But, you know, maybe we did a shorter fence, let them do a shorter fence up there. The grade is higher, so they're still gonna have the same effect with a shorter fence as with a 6-foot fence at that area. For privacy, I'm thinking, and maybe a little bit for sound. So, and I don't know if 4 foot's the right height, maybe 3 foot's the right height, I don't know.
So I think, I don't know if there's a right avenue for it, but I see a few potential concerns, both short and long-term. One is if traffic is a concern, which I don't disagree it is not, traffic's a concern in this city in general. I think we can all understand that, and there's some studies that need to be done on that. One is you gotta look at and understand what the triangle of vision is. Does putting a 6-foot fence at that point in time, should there be a road widening at some point in time, does that impact the triangle of vision? Number one. Number two, privacy being the concern and the desire, how can we achieve that for them? Because I agree with them that there should be some type of way of having that. But number three, on the growth of that area and the area in general, how do we incorporate all that? So traffic, road widening potentially with a left-hand turn, whatever that may be long-term, we don't know. There's a lot going on there. A lot going on there.
We don't know how they'll ever widen that road.
There's potential.
There's two,
There's,
on the other side of the street, I mean, I'm not talking about my side of the street, but the other side of the street where that is all the way along there. And the people across Bristol from me have to take a chunk of their front yard.
so my question to the board would be, does putting a fence up there impact the triangle of vision today? Because if it does, that's a big concern. You can't see right, can't see left, how do you come out there and turn right and left? Now you're creating a problem for accidents, potentially, with that opaqueness.
The fence man measured that it's 100 feet. It's 100 feet from the corner. From the actual curb, where your car would even be a little bit further when you're looking. I can't imagine that it would obstruct the view.
Gotta stop anyway.
They don't stop anyway.
I think a general point of reference, if I can jump in, I'm not the city engineer or DPW guy, but the triangle of vision is gonna be usually something like a 45-degree right at the corner. And as long as that fence is proposed coming off the back of the garage, I don't think that would be as much an issue at that spot. It's a good thing to bring up, though.
Coming off the back of the garage though, right?
That's right.
Yeah, I don't see that being a problem
I
either.
don't see that as an issue either.
You're looking to put this fence up to the corner, up to the sidewalk?
No.
No.
Okay.
No, not to the corner.
From the back of the garage over.
To, okay.
To the edge of the back of the house.
Yeah, clarification on this image, I think the dashed line is where you're allowed to put a chain link fence. So that's just a reference for these folks. I think this line
That
here
front,
is the.
that
Okay.
dotted line that goes.
We'll strike that entire comment from there then.
I'm just wondering if some of your problems couldn't be solved along Bristol with fast-growing shrubbery tightly placed together. And the reason I say that is my folks had a place on 10 Mile Road between Sparta and Rockford. There's a ton of traffic, and they planted along the front there a lot of shrubbery, and it deadened the sound, and it was much more private.
Allow those to grow. I want something immediate. I don't want to do anything. This is 7 years old already. You know, you guys, I've lived there 45 years. This is the first time I've asked for anything. I just want to fence my yard in. If I don't want a 4-foot fence. It's gonna look, it's not gonna match the fence on the other side.
I want to follow up on what Randy had said about the elevation change. I think the way a compliant fence going right off the corner to the back, a 6-foot solid fence at the base of a slope, I think would present its own problems, even if it was compliant. To me, what Randy had suggested of a shorter fence at the top of the hill would be more practical for lots of reasons.
You know what?
Appear to be a lot
This fence
taller.
is gonna cost me a lot of money. And I want what I want. You know, I don't want a 4-foot fence. I don't want a fence that's not gonna match the other side. Here you've got a resident that wants to put a substantial investment in their property, and we're haggling over it. I'm sorry.
I wonder if the board would benefit from having a little bit more information to give them something to react to. I think I hear what they're saying. They're giving some ideas for some leniency on that standard of the height. Is there a drawing or a proposal that could be a little bit more spelled out by the fence consultants that you're a fence contractor? I do wonder if they could provide a little bit more information that would lend to how the fence might be segmented in a way that would meet what these folks are talking about, where it's a little shorter at the top of the hill.
Shorter at the top of it, I don't understand what you mean.
I think if you look at, and hear me out, I'm trying to translate here, but if you look at the TV screen, you have the hill at the, on Bristol. And I think the idea is to have a shorter fence along Bristol
And then a taller fence
That-
next to my house?
that ties in next to the house.
So that they don't match? Well,
think it would keep
that- I don't even know, you know what?
Debbie,
This is very frustrating for me. Are you gonna let me do the fence or are you not? These other people are waiting to have their argument with you. This is not rocket science here. I'm not asking you to cut off a leg.
Is there anyone else that wants to speak to this? In the audience? Okay.
I'm wondering if you're just not picturing by the time you do have a 4 foot on the hill and it goes down the slope to meet the 6 foot, from the eye point of view, that might
It's
look,
gonna look like hell, lady.
from the eye point of view, that could look level, and that's why he thinks the fence people would be able to answer that, because they are professionals at building fences on slopes.
Is there anyone who wants to speak to this variance, in the audience?
You live by me? She don't live by me.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm hearing that there's a cut and dry proposal that's set the way that is proposed, and you can react to that one, or approve that as it is, or deny it.
Close the hearing.
Yep. That's-
I make a motion to close the hearing.
I'll support that.
All in favor of closing the hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Hearing's closed.
I'd like you to think about if this was your house. And you were being told that you've been paying taxes for 45 years on this whole big yard, all these square footage, and you can't put a fence where you want to put a fence. So that if I get a dog, it won't run out of my yard. I mean, is it that big of a deal? It's gonna be a nice looking fence. It's gonna be a beautiful fence.
Okay. Any thoughts? Yes.
It's gonna be a whole lot nicer looking than the chain link fence that we took down.
Beat a dead horse a little bit. If this request is approved, you'd see a privacy fence at the red line. If it's denied, they would be allowed to have a chain link fence at the line, as shown on the line that's the more spaced out dash marks on this image. And then they could still have a privacy fence extending from the back of the garage to the northern property line. So that is one possible outcome of a denial, would be you could still have a fence up to the front lot line on Bristol.
Or the application could be modified, a possible different solution.
Yep.
Well, it appears to me that the option here is we want a 6-foot fence all the way around, or we want, or it's, we don't want it then. So I think we've been asked by the applicant to vote on that, so, if, I guess there's no other options, there's no other, so we're not willing to listen to some recommendations, then I think we just need to make a motion here and move forward.
Someone like to make a motion?
I guess to alleviate confusion at this point, you might do something like a straw poll. Somebody might have an idea of which way this might be going, but just keep in mind, it's better to make a positive motion, whether you're voting to deny or approve, say that we vote to So that if somebody says we vote to approve and then it's a 3-4 vote, that's not as good for our records. So I would just encourage you to come to understanding of which way the majority is going, and then somebody representing the majority should make the motion.
Okay, start down there.
Tom?
Deny.
Craig?
In the black and white as is, deny.
Randy?
Deny.
Pat?
Deny.
As a 6-foot fence, deny.
Deny.
I said, as a 6-foot fence, I would deny it.
Deny.
But I could do a 4-foot fence. You know, I am pissed. What do I do with the yellow?
What, I guess to smooth out this process, if you were willing to come back, I think what I heard was that there's an option to table this request, to come back with a request for a 4-foot fence.
So I need to come back and ask for a variance for something I don't even want? I
fact-
want a 6-foot fence.
I think
Where on the yard, you don't like the 6-foot fence along the Harding side?
What we're saying is you can have a 6-foot fence if you were to protrude it, so if you're looking at the screen, you could have a 6-foot fence coming directly off the back of your house to
Well,
here.
yeah, you want to know what?
And that would give you privacy in your
My
backyard.
sprinklers are all here.
And your
So
sprinklers would s-
what the hell, in the hill, this is a corner here. You want to come over to my house tomorrow, well, my husband's having surgery tomorrow, and walk my yard?
I did, today.
Did you, this would make my yard useless. This would make my yard useless. And if I did it like this, how is the lawn guy gonna get back there?
We could put a 6-foot-
And I'm sprinkling all of this. I'm gonna tell you what, I have the nicest house in that whole area. My husband and I have put a lot of money in that house and take a lot of pride in that we've kept it nice. And the traffic is unbearable. The traffic is unbearable. And the city is unwilling to do anything about that. Unlike Grand Rapids, who is lowering their speed limits all over the place and putting bike lanes and putting speed humps, Walker does nothing. We
Okay,
are
Pam?
turning into Kentwood,
Pam?
where everybody is just driving fast through it to get to work or shopping.
Okay.
Nobody's gonna wanna live here, and this is why. Because I wanna improve my property and put a fence, and you're telling me no.
Okay,
Thank you very much. You don't know how I would love to pick my house up and move it out of Walker.
Deb, let's go. Yep.
Somebody needs to get control of this. This is ridiculous.
I think we still have to vote.
Yep.
Do a motion.
okay, so we have a motion to deny?
I make a motion to deny the request by owners Deborah and Michael Vick to install a 6-foot tall privacy fence in the required front yard, contrary to the section 94-3372.
Do I hear support?
I support.
All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Denied.
Pay extra for that.
Moving on.
I think we need a break.
Mr. Chair, can I go get a cup of coffee?
Sure can.
I need a drink.
So maybe the chair can call a brief, maybe 5-minute break if you'd like to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll take a short break.
I second that.
Appreciate everyone's patience, everybody who stuck through from Grand Rapids to this last case here. Hey, sorry. Sometimes, yeah, you don't expect that.
So glad that she came down there right now.
I tried. It is. You have to let people know, so.
No, you did a good job explaining, there's nothing, we tried to work everything we could do for her.
Right.
I think the issue was she can't visualize what that
If it
4-foot
happens
fence on that
above
berm would be,
You can limit.
so it looked like it's 6 foot.
Look ridiculous.
No harm, no foul. Yeah,
Even-
let people know.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, ultimately, we don't want to step on your toes and cut off your process.
I need chocolate.
I tried. I mean, I really did. Felt like I was. Grenade! I think she's got.
There's no way you could have gotten her home with her back. There's no way you could have held her back.
Like,
Hey, Randy, you still going over there for peanut butter and jelly sandwiches?
Hey, I just have that happy face that, you know, just want me to come over.
Another loss.
Craig ruined that for me.
Sorry about that, Randy.
Well, it's sad though, because we wanted to work with her and she didn't want any part
Realize
of
how
it.
ridiculous she
Okay.
sounded, yeah.
I can get on the phone with her tomorrow. That's, I can start working on different solutions. There are a number of different
See if they can
options.
have some kind of a
Can we
drawing or
waive her fee
something.
if she comes back?
Waive her fee if she comes back.
I mean, or make it $30 if you want.
We'd have to cover our noticing costs, but we would, would be a new case request, but we could see that as more of a tabling style of leaving that case file open. We'll see what
I
we can do.
think visually, if she could see the fence on that berm, that it would be that 6 foot that she's talking about.
No,
I
she
don't
would
think
see-
she could visually see it.
Yeah, and I think that would be a new, on the one hand, we can leave that file open. It would be a new request in that case. So I can meet with her.
Rigid.
Talk about it.
Compliant.
All
I
set?
know what she is, because Harding, that area, I used to go through the back roads to get to the
A little
dentist.
bit.
We're still-
And I agree with her.
Traffic is horrendous.
Okay, we're going to resume our meeting. Applicant for 231 North Park here. Okay. The applicant hereby requests permission to perform mineral processing and material storage as defined in section 94-5 of the City of Walker zoning ordinances on 2 different properties with a total area of roughly 11.7 acres, contrary to section 94-254A, and then 254-1 and 254A again, of the Walker zoning ordinance, which requires a minimum of 20 acres for this land use. And I think, before I go any further, that was noticed as 13.7 acres.
Yes, that's a correction that should be clarified in the motion, and I'll state it again in my slides. There was an incorrect number on the acreage of contiguous property that's proposed for this use in the Walker city limits. For whatever reason, it was noticed as 13.7, it's 11.7. There's acreage that Caterburg Verhaeghe owns is roughly 30 acres in both Plainfield Township and Walker combined. And they have another property in Walker, so there's a confusing mosaic there. But 11.7 is the right number of acreage specific to this use in Walker.
Okay.
The above is contrary to the following sections of the City of Walker zoning ordinance, section 94A1 and 94AA of the zoning ordinance. Property descriptions 231 North Park Street Northeast and 271 North Park Street Northeast. Property owner is Caterberg Verhaeg, Inc. Property owner's address is 3717 Michigan Northeast Grand Rapids. Applicant's name is Tom Verhaeg, same address. Zoning is heavy industrial. Use of existing premises is landscape material storage and retail. Use of proposed premises is raw material processing and storage. Previous appeals is none. Okay, number one, exceptional and extraordinary circumstances that there are exceptional or extraordinary circumstances or conditions applying to the property in question as to the intended use of the property that do not apply generally to other properties in the same zoning district. The applicant's response was that the property is adjacent to the Grand River on the east, together with the existing wooded buffer along the river, which provides significant buffering, screening to residential uses on the east side of the river. US 31, I think that's 131, is adjacent to the west with the industrial uses west of the highway. Applicant-owned property in Plainfield Township is adjacent to the north with Fifth Third Ballpark parking area further to the north. Industrial uses are adjacent to the south, and the applicant controls greater than 20 acres of contiguous surrounding property in the city of Walker and Plainfield Township. Preservation rights, that such a variance is necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of substantial properties, rights similar to that possessed by other properties in the same zone district and in the vicinity. The possibility of increased financial return shall not in itself be deemed sufficient to warrant a variance. Applicant's response was the Greenleaf operation on parcel 201 North Park Street has a soil storage and processing operation on a 5.3 acre property along North Park Street. The parcel at 200 North Park Street at the southeast corner of US 131 and North Park Street has a storage and processing operation on 13.5 acres plus or minus. The parcel at 70 North Park Street at southwest corner of US 131 and North Park Street has a storage and processing operation on 19.7 acres of property. And parcels at 3566 and 3610 Mill Creek at the northwest corner of US 131 and North Park Street has a storage and processing operation on 13.5 plus or minus. No detriment. Authorizing such a variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property and will not materially impair or intent and purposes of this chapter or the public interest. Applicant's response was operation will be contained on a relatively small portion of the total site. Applicant adjacent residential properties to the east will be sufficiently buffered and screened. Paved and milled asphalt drives and staging areas will minimize production of the dust from the operations. Crushing and processing of minerals will be limited to a relatively short period of time annually, and hours of operation will be limited. Pile heights will be limited to 30-foot tall. Operations will not produce any significant odor, vibration, or light. Not a general problem. That the condition or situation of the piece of property or the intended use of such property for which the variance is sought is not of so general or recurrent a nature as to make it reasonably practicable of the formation of a general regulation for such condition or situation. The response from the applicant was that the applicant does own, control greater than 20 acres of property. However, a portion of the property lies with adjacent Plainfield Township. This fact is unique and not so general in nature that it will apply to other properties in that area. Okay, and we have some photos, some aerials. Looks like a previous deal at some point. Anything you'd like to add, Dan?
Sure, and you might refer to your plans, you got a full plan set associated with the application
yep.
as well.
Yep.
So I'll run through my slides and try to be as quick as I can about it, but this is by far the most complicated and large site that we're reviewing tonight, so I want to make sure we cover our bases. First of all, the correction needs to be made. The request is the same no matter what, and it's the same assemblage of properties that you were all noticed about. But the area, the properties, there are two properties on which this occasional concrete crushing and material storage in 6 different piles is proposed. That property covers 11.7 acres, not 13.7. And there's additional property as noted on the plans, and I don't have it memorized, but 11.7 for those two sites. Roughly 17.1 acres in the city of Walker, and that includes the Greenleaf Landscaping Company's existing site to the southwest. And there's about 31 acres of property if you include the Plainfield Township properties. So one thing to point out here is if this was all proposed on one contiguous lot in one city at 30 acres plus, it would be going straight to our planning commission as a special exception use review and not as a variance request. The reason it's in front of our zoning board is because of the 20-acre requirement being for the property it's being used on in Walker. So that gives you a little bit of the context. Here's one view of the overall site. Here's the close-up of the 4 material piles, I think covering roughly 2 acres in area. Kind of at the peak intensity, and the area to the north there is where there'd be some staging of equipment. And I think I see actually, including the 2 in the back side there by 131, there'd be 6 piles. And then the roughly 1 acre equipment staging area to the north. Kind of preliminary landscaping plan that was proposed when this came in as a application to our planning commission. Of course, when the 20-acre requirement was realized, that's when we diverted this review to the Zoning Board of Appeals. But this is all plans that were in progress, I think, regarding the planning commission review. So again, just to get a 40,000 foot level here, the lots that are being considered are kind of highlighted in that really bright yellow in the middle. And there's additional property owned by Caterberg Verhaeg. We're dealing with 3 to 4 municipalities, depending on how you look at it, because you have many folks in the audience here are probably City of Grand Rapids residents on the east side of the river, maybe some Plainfield Township folks kind of to the east northeast and to the north, and then the City of Walker is west and to the southwest. And then even farther northwest, you have Alpine Township. So you're at this kind of merging of different municipal boundaries, and they all have their own rules and regulations. They all have their own planning efforts. Although in this day and age, one thing we're trying to do is what's called edge matching and make sure that the uses we plan for line up with the long-term uses that'll work for all communities. But as it is here, we've planned for industrial land use for a long time. And then the zoning that's been applied to these properties has been heavy industrial. So you see a lot of similar use types in this area. Here's some nearby vantage points adjacent to the river. And then on the south side of the property on North Park Street looking into the site, this is the kind of the Greenleaf Landscaping entryway. And then on the top of the page here, the weather was a little worse, but this was just a couple days ago from some nearby properties on the one in the middle is, I think, Mill Creek Drive, and then there's Willow and Briggs Street properties where you can kind of see through the lines of the trees across the river. Again, with master planning, we try to make sure our current planning efforts line up with long-term efforts of other cities, but the way that this land has evolved in this area over time, we had a lot of industry along the river, and that's historically true of a lot of places. You have things like gravel processing and some industrial uses where they sprouted up along the river and along things like railroad beds over time, and that's kind of the pattern that we have in Walker in this part of town. But we're adjacent to a lot of residential land use, and that's part of what you'll see tonight is a lot of the folks who are across the river are very keenly aware of the industrial uses on the other side and being sufficiently buffered from them. And then you see some commercial and office to the north in Plainfield Township. This particular site has gone through a couple of stages of evolution. It was approved this was an initial plan, but then it grew into this plan for the Greenleaf Landscaping Company back in 2001. And there actually is material storage. There actually is the same use definition on that lot, kind of the lot to the southwest of where this use is proposed. It's smaller in scale and there's a smaller processing area, but this is specific to landscaping supplies like mulch, stone, bark. There's bins of stored materials in this site adjacent to the subject lot. So that's just a little bit of historical context. I'll pause there and say that the applicant could much better describe than I why they're moving to this site, what that means for their overall business model, and how this use you see on this screen relates to what they're proposing. So I'd ask them to explain why they're moving and what they're planning to do here. As far as exceptional or extraordinary circumstances, one thing that is noteworthy here is kind of the odd configuration and the fact that there are more than 20 acres of contiguous property in two different municipalities that are adjacent. It's just that you have that municipal boundary line separating the two sites owned by the same owner. So functionally, you're not going to have really another use sprouting up on the part that goes into Plainfield Township. It's all still part of the same ownership group. So in normal circumstances, that would credit towards those 20 acres, but here it doesn't. Another thing that's exceptional or extraordinary is the presence of the river in the floodplain. And that is either a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. Because on the one hand, you have a floodplain that has an area where you can't build, so you're going to see trees preserved there. You're going to see no grading, no intensive industrial activity right by the riverbank. At the same time, once you get over the land portion of that into the river, you have a big open area where things like noise sensitivity, air, light, odor, those things all carry over an open space like the river. So those are things to consider about the uniqueness of this site. But at the end of the day, one thing that's really stark here is the presence of more than 20 acres contiguous in different municipal boundaries. We do have some, they've provided more examples than I do, but there was a variance granted for the pitch industry on the other side, the south side of North Park, back in 1992. Some folks might say that's not the ideal example, if maybe that's not what we're shooting for here. They have a pretty intensive operation with a full-time crusher. That being said, that was a concrete crushing and material storage facility that was granted approval for in the early 90s. Another example is that's not on their list is the lawful non-conforming Grand Valley Concrete on 3 Mile. Not as sensitive in terms of being across a river from residential property, but that's another place where this right is being expressed on a smaller lot than would normally be allowed. When you look at no detriment, I think that is one of the things you really need to drill down on, and that's where I'll have a few slides on this one. So there are things that we need to consider. The intent of this ordinance to have 20 acres minimum for things like concrete crushing and material storage is to make sure that the site has the capacity for this use and that there's a built-in buffer that shields adjacent properties from this more intensive industrial activity. And I think the acreage is kind of a low-hanging fruit way to make sure that you have enough land available to move things around and keep it far enough away from your neighbors to not make a bad impact. But associated with that, what are the causes of the bad impacts? Well, it's things like noise, screening, vegetation along the sides of the property, adhering to performance standards related to vibration and odor and dust, air pollution, soil erosion, stormwater and floodplain issues. And then my last point here is special exception use standards. And the point I'm driving home with that is that if this does get approved, there's a whole second layer of approval and review that would have to be undertaken to get this use on this site. There'd have to be a planning commission review that takes a fine-tooth comb to all these issues and looks at how it lays out on this particular site. So those special exception use standards would be reviewed more closely if it gets to that point. I'm not going to go over them one by one, but those standards are listed on this slide. What they're basically saying is that this use does not inhibit the enjoyment of adjacent property. It can work in the context of what's around it if X, Y, and Z are obtained and completed to allow that use. Another thing to look at here, just in the context of this site, and not just kind of looking at the kind of general stuff in the zoning ordinance, but looking specifically at this site, is the adjacency of those properties across the river. What this image shows, and it needs some refinement, but what it shows is kind of the darker and the greener lines are lower elevations. The brighter, redder, yellow and red lines are higher. So what you have is a really flat floodplain and obviously a flat river surface that separates this site from pretty low-lying properties across the river. So this shows you in context and in scale how close this use would be to adjacent property. I will also say that typically, and the law requirement is that we would send 300-foot notices adjacent to the properties that are being in question. This was kind of a unique case where we looked more at the spirit of the law than the exact letter of the law. There's no property on the other side of the river that's within 300 feet of this site, but it's incumbent on us to make sure that those who might be affected by industrial uses on this riverbank are aware of what's happening on our side of the line. So we did include folks from Briggs, a couple properties from Willow, I believe, in our noticing. And I will reference on this next slide some of the concerns we got from them. I think there were a total of 23 letters. And so for those of you who are the last folks sitting, I commend you for hanging around. There are some folks that left. I'm sure there's more that sent letters in that aren't able to make it tonight. But here's the residents. I would ask the chair just to reference that we got letters from adjacent properties in this area, and we can add them to the record, but we don't have to go through them one by one. I will summarize the concerns we heard about. Is this going to be a high-intensity crushing operation? Pitch wrecking was used as an example. Will it be a source of air pollution? We're worried about the enjoyment of the White Pine Trail for biking, for the increasing interest in recreation in this area, for the use of the Riverside Park. Does this further inhibit folks who use the stadium? Does it inhibit the use of the river for boating and other forms of recreation? Is it going to be a source of water pollution, chemicals and runoff, noise? Is it consistent with some of the broader plans kind of spearheaded in Grand Rapids for having the Grand River be beautified and turned into a recreational corridor? Things like odor, dust, protections for wildlife, vibration, and whether the buffer of trees along the river will be sufficient to screen this use. So those are all valid concerns, and I think what you can do as a board to look at whether those can be addressed on a lot area that's smaller than 20 acres is to see if there's ways to mitigate some of these concerns with design items that can be addressed in a planning commission review. Just on another note, just to give you some more context of what this looks like from across the river, you do look like you're pretty close there. More than 300 feet sounds like a ways away, but it's really not that far. The river is somewhere between 500 and 800 feet wide at various points adjacent to the project area. So you can see how you'd see those impacts. This is up on Willow Drive. It's actually a little bit north of where this site would be. This is down on Briggs where it's a little bit closer. And in fact, if you look really close in that image, you can see I think that's one of the adjacent properties where there's a batch plant. And this is near the end of Elmdale Street. So you can see the adjacency and the need to be sensitive to what's being used across the way. And then is this a general problem that we should take a shot at reducing the intensity of our ordinance? I think this ordinance was written for good reason. It actually was written in the early 1990s along with a set of standards for junkyards. So the powers that be at that time were looking at ways, I think, to firm up some of our rules regarding some of these more intensive uses in Walker. So that's where some of the rigid standards you saw for junkyards come in, and the 20-acre minimum requirement for this mineral processing use, as well as things like 500-foot setback from certain forms of residential zoning for this type of use. And so those stringent standards are there for a good reason, and I don't think they should be changed. I think instead we can look at the merits of this specific case. My recommendation is that I want to give the applicant a chance to describe their request more fully. I want to give the folks who stuck through this meeting and stayed in the audience a chance to speak if the chair would like to. Well, it's a public hearing, so they should. But also to acknowledge that we got a lot of comments from them in writing. But if there's a way to justify that this use will be sufficiently buffered and its impacts will be sufficiently mitigated through the Planning Commission review, I think a conditional approval could be appropriate. But along with that, I think conditions should be imposed, like, this is kind of redundant because it would have to happen anyway, but there's a full site plan review and special use permit review, that sound measurements are taken from equipment that would be generated on this site, that what I'm calling a view shed analysis would be done. In other words, an analysis that shows, based on the existing topography from some adjacent residences across the river, where there might be gaps in the tree cover, especially in the winter. Limits on the time frame of the actual crushing activity. And my understanding from a recent conversation with the owner is this would be a machine that's on site for a limited portion of the year. So in terms of that statement, can we limit the time frame to a few week window or to a few specific crushing activity periods, and do it all while there's leaves on the trees so that it's not exposed to the folks across the river as much. Those are reasonable conditions that I would encourage you to look at if you're inclined to approve. And also that the two lots, if it's possible to combine them, which it may not be possible if there's underlying title issues or easement issues, but if it is possible to combine them, let's combine those lots so they're both tied into this use in the long term. So those are all conditions I'd ask you to consider if you're inclined to approve. You might hear different aspects of this and come to your own conclusions on the 4 criteria that are listed to see whether it should be granted. So I'd still fall back on those 4 criteria at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Can I get a motion to open the hearing?
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Sandra,
I'll support it.
support by Pat. All in favor of opening the hearing?
Aye.
Hearing's open. Okay. Applicant for 231 North Park.
Good evening.
Hi.
My name is Todd Stivey. I'm with Excel Engineering. I'm the engineer that prepared the site plan that you have in front of you. I'm representing Kederberg Verhaeg here tonight. Tom Verhaeg and others are in the audience and will also be available for questions and comment. I'm not going to just read through my narrative again, but our primary arguments are there. But I just will expound on that just a little bit here, and then we'll go forward. Just to reiterate, the special exception use is on an 11.7 acre piece of property. Kederberg Verhaeg owns 17 acres, so just shy of the 20 that we would need in the city of Walker. And with the property that they own contiguous in Plainfield, there's 30 acres. So I think the spirit and intent of the ordinance is met by the properties that they do own. However, the actual size of the property that can be put under the special land use, or special exception use, is less than 20. And one thing that mitigates that is the actual size of the process that we're proposing. As Dan mentioned, about 1.5 acres of pile area. And in the processing, when processing comes in, that might be, maybe closer to 2, just because there's some equipment that needs to be staged in the processing equipment. But of that 11 or almost 12 acres and of the total of 30 acres, we're just using a very small portion of the site. It's centrally located. So from that standpoint, I think that's a mitigating factor to consider. The processing typically would occur in October and November. The exact time frame, if it wants to be honed in, I suppose it could. How it works is when they generate about 10,000 cubic yards of unprocessed material, that's enough for the the secondary company to come in and do the processing. Typically, I think we're asking for 4 to 6 weeks of a time frame to do that processing, and that would happen during normal business hours, or the hours of operation would be limited. And just a consideration of the, I mentioned the size and scope of the project, all the piles will be located above the 100-year floodplain of the river. We can't do any storage of material within the floodplain. And most of the areas outside of where the piles are below the floodplain. So the expansion of this process over time could not happen, without filling floodplain of the Grand River, which we wouldn't be allowed to do. So this is a limited size. I mean, pitch is mentioned. It's a much more significant size of a operation, and we're not looking to emulate what they do there in any way. So it was also mentioned that the site is surrounded really on all sides by either industrial uses or industrial zone. So really the most sensitive side is obviously the east side across the river where the residential properties exist. And then just as far as distance, Dan mentioned that within the ordinance, you need to be at least 500 feet away from a residential property. The river in this location is about 660 feet wide. The closest residence is about 1,000 feet, either to the northeast or the southeast. Those are not the properties right on Briggs, but on the lower homes that are right on the river. So we're about 1,000 feet away, about twice the distance, minimum distance that would be required. And the homes that are directly east of us on Briggs are about 1,400 feet away. So those are just some, from a buffering standpoint, the sheer distance is a factor. But there are also the areas of natural trees that are in place between the river and the operation, and also whatever screening occurs on the other side of the river. So I feel that's a significant benefit. And I think this is mentioned too, really, as far as variances go, this is a little bit different for you. It's a dimensional variance, but your variance would only allow us to go before the Planning Commission to do the work of the special exception use. Your approval would not grant approval for the use on the site. It would just allow us to go that next step and be before the Planning Commission so they can do their work. So I think we all understand that, but you still need to be comfortable with your 4 fun questions. So that's all that I have. I'll ask Tom to come up, and Dan asked to explain why we're moving here, why they're moving here. But I'll have Tom explain that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I'm Tom Verhaeg from Kederberg Verhaeg. And to give you a little history of what we've done in Walker, we purchased the property back around 2001, and we then opened a yard there for our Greenleaf supplies, landscape supplies. We improved the property considerably from what it was in the beginning, and we keep it looking neat and nice, and this is our plan for this as well. This isn't a huge, maybe big, normal concrete crushing operation. It's more of a part-time, more than totally different than what happens across the street. We don't have any of the crushing equipment we hired to come in, and as Todd explained, it takes 10,000 yards to get them to come in and do it, and it would happen in a short period of time, probably like 4 to 6 weeks, which we mentioned. So it is a product that we sell and that we use. It's primarily going to be brought in by us from projects we have. There'll be a small amount from other contractors that would come in and bring it, but we generally do not sell it. We use it ourselves. I wouldn't say that's 100% true, but it's probably 95% true. So that's kind of the reason why we're doing it there, because it's a good product for us to sell. And we generate a lot of it on the other end, so to speak, when you have projects that have to have concrete removed and so forth. So that's the situation there.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll see if anyone in the audience has anything to add. Is there anyone? If you could state your name and address, please.
Hey guys, thanks for taking some time. My name is James Barber. I live at 3427 Briggs Boulevard. This happens to be a property that's directly across the river from the property in question. I have a number of concerns about this, obviously, just as a resident, someone that enjoys the outdoors, someone that cares about maintaining my property value. I do appreciate the hard work that goes into building a business, and I understand that there's certain activities people need to do to make money. With that said, I do have a list of concerns. First of all, I sent a letter today with a number of my own measurements I took that, this is before I saw the inaccurate measurement email come back from Dan, which I appreciate, but I noticed a number of measurements that seem to be creatively altered for the purposes of this report, using GPS satellite like Google Earth, like Google Maps, things like that. I was able to check some of these measurements myself. Anyways, my first concern goes about the inaccuracy of some of the things in the report. I think that represents misinformation. Or misinformation in the report represents a posturing of a business owner that may not be acting in good faith and to present honest information to people like myself. We just heard him say the river is 605 feet wide. I've measured that myself. Also with Google Earth, it's 502 feet when the river's high from the edge of my property, which is off by 100 feet. There's a number of these discrepancies in the report that raise concern, but moving along. My second concern was that none of the comps share the same unique properties of this exposed and narrow piece of property. So let me see here. I have a few examples. I'm a little nervous about this, by the way. I don't talk into a microphone very often.
Take your time.
Yeah, you're fine.
So some of the unique properties of this specific location, as I said, it's very narrow. It has a mixed use, whereas a lot of the comps seem to have a dedicated use. By mixed use, there's a boatyard there where people are launching rowing shells. There's a bike path that goes through there that the public uses every day. The river on one side, it's unfortunate to hear Verhey call that an industrial border. Obviously, to me, the river is not an industrial zone. That is something that I use for enjoyment whenever possible. Yeah, so I mentioned the bike path, the rowing club. They also have a business there that I've supported buying mulch from. But it's open to the public. I guess I'm just trying to illustrate there's a number of mixed things happening at this particular property that bring in a lot of people. None of the other comps that were provided in this report have those same qualities that would bring in a lot of traffic. All of the comps, too, were further from residential houses. Most of them were over 2 times as far from the closest property measured by satellite GPS, Google Earth. The ballpark as well is another example of just like, it's a place that brings people together, a community gathering hub. Even in the parking lots there, we go there for Christmas lights, we go there for the Winter Beer Festival. This place is almost entirely surrounded not by what I would call industrial uses, but by areas that the public uses regularly. The river, the bike path, the ballpark, etc. My third concern is about the coverage, buffer, and screening. So I understand that trees and vegetation could definitely serve as coverage. Where the river is, those things cannot exist. And anyone who's heard, kids partying out on a lake, how sound travels across water. There's nothing to break up the breeze, nothing to break up any debris that might be flowing across that area. And it's coming quick when it hits the shoreline. So a lot of concerns about that. Also, because of the narrowness of this property, much narrower than any of the other comps provided, even if they were to let a lot of vegetation grow in the holes that currently exist, I mean, we're talking 20, 30 years before you have substantial trees that would block the view. Even then, our property sits up a little higher, but we'd have clear, visible sight to a 30-foot pile. It would significantly impact our view. I can see the shed on the riverbank from every room of my house that faces the river, if that paints a picture. There's a lot of stuff in here. I'm kind of bumbling. I guess my biggest question is, like, as a property owner, we've chosen this house for a reason, and it wasn't the house, it was the backyard. I know that this particular business and the type of work that they do has caused problems previously. I think we would be silly to think that those problems wouldn't exist in our neighborhood as they did in a more wealthy, upscale neighborhood. I think about the narrative of moving, the dirtiest parts of a business from a new upscale neighborhood into a blue-collar neighborhood like ours, and it doesn't feel like it's the right thing to do. Like, especially when my property would be closer than the properties that were irritated by this particular type of business in the previous location. So, as a property owner, as a citizen, as someone that uses the river, the bike path, goes to the ballpark, the boating stuff that goes on this location brings in a ton of people. They go to Walker bars, they go to Walker restaurants. People come from all over, and although this area is heavy industrial, a lot of people use it for things that enrich the quality of their life. They use it to exercise, they use it to gather. I think we'd be missing an opportunity to continue to improve this neighborhood if we were to open up the floodgates and let more of what people typically don't want to see come into the neighborhood. So thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that'd like to address this variance? If you could state your name and address, please.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Van Houdy, and I live at 3420 Briggs Boulevard. I'm sorry, Dan Power, I got your name wrong in the email, so I apologize for that.
All right.
I sent my email today, so I'm going to just read that because I don't know, I wasn't on the list of letters, so. I reside, I already said that. Okay, sorry, I am very nervous. Our home is 2 blocks from North Park and across the street from those on the river. As a neighbor of multiple industries, I'm writing to ask you to please decline the request of Kederberg Verhaeg and thereby uphold the existing ordinance. Should this variance be granted, it would create a substantial detriment to neighboring properties. Noise and pollution from industry in the area not only affect the homes nearby, but the spaces that by law we share, namely the White Pine Trail and the river itself. Furthermore, granting this variance would give other properties in this district reason to make similar requests, making our neighborhood vulnerable to the effects of further industrial expansion. Given that there are many heavy industrial businesses operating in close proximity to the Kederberg Verhaeg property, this is a valid concern. I'm not here to complain about the existing operations of this particular business. Kederberg Verhaeg does beautiful work. However, the tagline on their webpage reads, "Create, grow, preserve." As a consumer, I would expect a business's site of operations to be as committed to preservation as their work in the community testifies. I'm here to ask that you stand by the limits in place which protect our rights as residents. Thank you for your time and your service.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Hi, my name is Rosemary Mifsud. I live at 3427 Briggs, which is directly across river from this proposed site. To illustrate the importance we place in our backyards, I wanted to read the intro letter that we sent when we were trying to buy our house 2 years ago. To the owner of 3427 Briggs, My name is Rosemary. My husband James and I are absolutely in love with your home. Because an offer letter can only communicate so much, we wanted to take a moment to write you a quick letter explaining why we would so greatly appreciate the opportunity to be the next owners, caretakers, and residents of this amazing property. When James and I found your house online, we knew right away that we were going to do everything we could to try and purchase it. There are just so many things we love about it. The first and probably the most obvious is your backyard. It has always been our dream to live on the water. What an amazing park you have back there. We love the naturally spaced trees, the pond, the curvy cove that invites the river into your space, and all the birds and creatures that also call it home. During our brief tour, we saw an oriole, several swans, ducks, frogs, and a crane. I could go on and on about your backyard, but I'll just save you the time and say that we love it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
My name is Catherine Block. I live at 3345 Briggs Boulevard, right on the river, on about an acre of land. Our backyard is one of the most wonderful things about our retirement. We're hoping to stay in, we bought the house cash. We were so excited to have that kind of a backyard. My brother, you showed his property several times at 3331 Briggs Boulevard, lives right next door. He enjoys the backyard very, very much too. He also has his retirement dependent on 4 other houses he owns within a few blocks of our houses, which he manages. He owns and manages them and keeps wonderful care of them for their tenants. It's already difficult sometimes in the summer. We can't have our slider doors open. We can't have windows open because of the pitch melting operation across. Oftentimes, we can't have the windows open on a windy day because a great deal of dust comes in right off the river. I will keep it short. I agree with other things that my neighbors have had to say about the situation. It's just going to not make it be, I mean, it's already difficult sometimes, but this is going to improve things. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else care to address the variance?
Frank Blazo, 439 Elmdale Street. The winds are, usually coming from the west, and all that stuff the river is not a buffer. It almost exacerbates the problem. And we're getting, and this would only just add to it. We're already getting like things mentioned, plus the asphalt company is, constantly giving us toxic air. And who's to say, okay, they're going to only, they say they're only going to do it a certain time of year and only have 4 piles, but who's going to watch them and hold them to that, I mean, I think pitch has expanded farther, more than filled in wetlands, more, and who's watching it, they're just, oh, okay.
Thank you.
My name is Nancy Steltman. I too live at 3345 Briggs Boulevard with Catherine Block. We had a home on the west side of Grand Rapids for 25 years that we put a lot of money into and made a lot of improvements on, and we loved to death. And we planned to live there till we died, until it got to be impossible, as we got older, to stay there because of safety issues in the area that we lived on. As Catherine mentioned, her brother lives next door from the house we have now. He told us that the previous owner was leaving. And we got to a point where episodes happened in our neighborhood where we made the decision we could no longer stay there, which we had completely planned on doing. So when we moved to Briggs, we felt we had really jumped ship onto a wonderful, wonderful lifeboat. And we've been there, we moved in 4 years ago, October. And we have an awful lot of our money, as Catherine mentioned. We paid cash for that house to get it and get it when we got it. And we have our life in there now. And there will probably come a time when we perhaps, if one of us is left or whatever, one of us is left there, we're going to have to sell it and get some money out of it to take care of us. We don't have children. There will not be anyone there to take care of us. It is an absolutely gorgeous property, and I can't do any better than what other people have said, but I will say this. You look at what's happening to the water in Rockford. You look at what's happening to the water in Plainfield Township. We don't want to hear any more about it.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Zelda Coulter, 3557 Briggs Boulevard, and I too only sent my email late today, so I won't just read what I sent you. My concerns are the increase in the noise level and an increase in particulate air pollution. In the application for this zoning variance, the wooded area along the riverbank is considered to provide a significant buffer and screening. I do not agree with this, as many of my neighbors have expressed they don't either. It is a sparse line of trees. As we've already stated, the river itself is not a buffer. On the contrary, the river amplifies sound and carries the dust and particulate over to us. In our neighborhood east of the river, we are at the intersection of two freeways, and the Walker Industrial Zone adds to this noise level. Every time the asphalt plant fires up its burners, I can hear them from inside my home. If I'm outside, I can feel the vibration. I hear loud banging and clanging. Quite often, the material conveyors are screeching and in need of repair. The high-pitched beeps of backing trucks some days are incessant. All these sounds are heard inside my home, even through the acre of woods between me and the river. And I'm a nervous speaker too, so excuse me. So for me, it's not whether the Catterberg operation will be any louder than the existing businesses, but they will add to the noise level that we already experience. And that also the application nearby properties are mentioned as operating on equally small acreage. Two of those businesses, the asphalt company and demolition contractors that we call pitch wrecking, seem to be on land far too small for the operations going on there. The piles of materials on those sites seem to have increased dramatically in recent years. If we allow yet another business on land not spacious enough, it will increase what I believe is already an overload of noise and air particulates. Increasing air particulates is a health hazard, leading to an increase in the cases of asthma. I spoke recently to a neighbor on our area that she has asthma. Many people do, and especially children are susceptible. In recent years, our older neighborhood has seen an increase in young families, and I would like to see them thriving and vibrant in the years to come. It's all well and good for a company seeking a zoning variance to say they will do this or that. Yet I could not help but notice on the record provided in the packet from March 1992, David Blanford stated that the company had already purchased a street sweeper to keep the road clean. I have never seen this happen. North Park is increasingly covered in debris from that operation. Also in '92, Larry Pitch indicated they were in the process of constructing a 150-yard paved driveway to prevent materials from being deposited in the street. Now, 2018, 16 years later, I cannot see that such a driveway exists. Furthermore, erosion has not been controlled at the pitch site. One only needs to look down from the bridge to see a large island of washout from pitch wrecking facility. I understand this is a different operation, but I just don't feel another dirty, noisy business is appropriate for such a slender property along the riverbank. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mark Pell.
I live at 435 Elmdale, so if you go back to the pictures, my yard would be the one with the split rail fence that dead ends right into the river. And Elmdale's the only street that goes to the river. And that's a conduit for families coming down. It's the only way they can get down to the river. And over the 30 years I've been there, so many people have thought my yard was a park. I let them use it. It's all great, you know. Just clean up after yourself. It's all fun, right? And to see those big mounds would be, I don't know, would you want to come down there and go look at it, piles of dirts and stuff? You know? But that's kind of the emotional part on my end. Obviously, I don't want it. But to get to the technical part, if you look at the picture there, their property, okay, so it approaches, I forget the numbers, 20 acres or whatever. But if you look at the northern edge upriver, you got probably a 3-acre pond there that the DEQ is not going to let them touch. So now you're down to 17-ish. You have the boathouse, which would probably be a pretty big PR hit for Caterburg. I don't know, but I wouldn't like it if they took out a nice public boathouse like that. You know, so, you know, that decreases the working property by a lot, especially that pond. That, I can guarantee that pond is not going anywhere, so it's not workable land. Wow, getting nervous. And he mentioned Greenleaf, how they kind of have the same kind of material, you know, wood chips, stone, and everything like that. But that stuff is a lot denser than cement dust. You know, we're not getting that floating across the river, you know. We will get the dust. That's pretty obvious. So to make that comparison to Greenleaf's materials and what we're going to, whereas them, we're going to process, it's not comparable. It's not an apples to apples. There's just no way. And about the noise of the machines over there, right now, when I don't know, it's that construction company there that's right now that has these tandem trailers, when they dump, their tailgate, bam! I mean, one little tailgate, that's probably 8x8. It's a pretty piece of heavy steel, but that's quite a noise. It scares the hell out of my dog, you know. And, so if you start putting grinding machines out there, it's going to be magnified who knows how many times. You know? But nobody's really, there was slight mention of wildlife, right? But what's really cool down there, and I sit down there a lot, right? And I've been there 30 years. I've seen 3 wild otters in the past 3 years. All right, there's an article on MLive from 2016. You can go back. They mentioned wild otters on the river. It's pretty rare, I think, you know, 3 in 30 years. So there's something going on right there where wildlife, rare wildlife, is like in the area, okay? And another one was this year, in the area, I don't know exactly where, but you can sit down at the end of my yard, and you're welcome to use it. Just clean up after yourselves. You're welcome to use it. Come on down, and you'll hear these bald eagles. There's a nesting pair of bald eagles, and they have a pair of young. All right, and it's just amazing. It's just, I don't know, I suppose if I was a bald eagle, I wouldn't want to live by a concrete crushing, you know, area. But again, there's something going on in the environment that's welcoming these rare animals to live there. They know where they want to live, right? And I had one more. Yeah, ospreys, yep. Oh, this year, I believe, I saw a beaver. Now, I know there's not really many beaver dams on the river, but I've been there 30 years. The thing was just way too big to be a muskrat. I couldn't tell. And again, it's another rare animal. And if you if you're a fisherman, like lake trout, I mean stream trout, you walk up to that edge of that stream and you just create the slightest vibration, that fish is gone. Or it even happens on my property with pike that sit right on the edge. And you can sneak up and all of a sudden, boom, because they can just feel the slightest, yeah, I'm kind of overweight, but I don't make that much vibration, all right? You start putting kind of heavy vibrating materials on the west side of the river where a lot of the walleye fishermen fish that side of the river a whole lot more than they fish the east side. So again, there's something on that side of the river that is environmental friendly to wildlife. And I think this kind of operation is going to change that. And basically my point is, who's getting anything out of this? Caterburg's going to make money, you know. Mankind, that's kind of cliche, but sorry. Mankind's going to lose a whole lot. You know, we're going to lose sight of the nice, beautiful. Who's going to want to walk down to the river and look at it? Who's going to want to use my yard as a park? You know, if I'm looking at 3 piles of crushed concrete. And another point I wanted to ask was, are there limits on the height of these concrete piles?
Yes. Yeah, the limit, I think, is 35 feet in our ordinance. So
35 feet, okay. The boathouse, Grand Rapids Boathouse that you see in the picture, right, comes up like this, that peak is 30 feet. And if you look from those distant photos, that boathouse is so visible. So now compare the boathouse, when you think this over, to a pile of dirt, basically. And I think I have more, but that's about it. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Van Kloppenberg. I live at 3355 Briggs Boulevard. I did send in remarks on Monday evening, but I just wanted to come to the mic and reiterate my concerns about the environmental impact and how this goes against the trends that are currently underway in Grand Rapids to beautify and repurpose the riverbank. You may be familiar with the River for All campaign in Grand Rapids, where like 7-8 miles of beautification and parks building. And it seems like the city of Walker has an opportunity here to use this ordinance to stop this in its tracks. I think I remember hearing something about across the street on North Park. A long time ago, it used to be a car racing track. And somewhere along the line, people decided to put industry, and I just think how cool it would have been to keep that a recreational and public use space. So I feel like this is a good opportunity. I also wanted to say that with the major flooding that we've had, I've been in the house 8 years. I've seen 2 very severe floods that have impacted neighbors. It hasn't impacted my house, but the vegetation down at the river, I have several old ash trees, and I thought they had been hit by emerald ash borer, but I had a forester tree expert come out, and it's actually them soaking up all the excess water. It's killing our trees. So then there goes more buffer as time goes on, as well as with the removal of the dams downstream. That could impact the amount of water we have upstream that would narrow the riverbed potentially. So I just wanted to add those extra comments, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Hi there. I'm John Coulter, and for 25 years lived at 3557 Briggs. I'm just going to read the conclusion or summary of what I sent in just today. I'm asking that the Walker Zoning Board stick to a strict interpretation of the section that's in potential violation, and that you treat the spirit of that 20-acre limit, or it has to be a minimum of 20 acres. I don't think there's really enough room for an operation of this type, because I've looked at their operation that they've been using in the aerial view, and it just sprawls over a 60-acre plot. I think they're proposing now to start out small, but I don't trust the future. Down the road 5-10 years, they'll already be there, and it's taking that property in the wrong direction. As you've heard, there's a lot going on that's trending the other way, not just in the way people want to use the space, but the wildlife. And to conclude, the history of equivalent variances for similar operations in this neighborhood shows that once granted, these operations are typically left to their own devices and proceed to demonstrate bad stewardship of the public roads and the air quality, to be endured by all who pass through, live, or work in this area. This would be a good time for the board to break from the old history of granting these variances for this kind of use on the North Park Mill Creek corridor. I appreciate your consideration from all of us.
Thank you. Sure.
And speaking of the airflow, how they mentioned 1,000 feet, 1,400 feet where the house is. Well, those houses on the river, mine's about 200-300 feet off the river, but still in the lowest part. But the ones on the very edge of the river right there, when, you know, they're talking about the dust coming across, right, 1,000, 1,400 feet. Well, I know from experience, living down in that valley, that the air current is not there. I'd go up to Northview High School for a soccer game. I'd be dressed in a real nice shirt. I'd get up there and it's colder and cold because that wind is just going right up. So it's really carrying that, it's going to carry that dust way up into the neighborhoods, a lot more than, you know, the 1,400 feet, however they viewed that or made that point. So it's going to affect up in the neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, my name is Terry Foley. I live at 3451 Briggs Boulevard Northeast. Been there since September of 1991. When I moved in, pitch was not where it was now. Done deal, not much we can do about that. We can't go back. I do believe that was a bad decision at the time, issuing the variance. I think once you issue variances like that, as Zelda had said, things kind of stonewall or, you know, roll up that way. We weren't notified by the board. I appreciate that the city of Walker chose to notify the residents of Grand Rapids because we were going to be impacted by a decision that you made, because we are all residents of Kent County, we all share that. If any of you have ever made concrete, you know, we've done stuff in our house, built stairs and stuff, there are toxic chemicals in concrete. They tell you if you get it on your hands, wash it really well or you'll get burned. If they're crushing this up, not only is it going to be dust, it's going to be hazardous dust. What kind of chemicals are left in the dust that's going to be floating around, that's going to land on the ground, that's going to be driven off the site, that's going to land in the water and going to go downstream? It's going to muck up a lot of that kind of stuff. The river has really changed a lot since I've been there. It's been flooding more and more since I've been there. And it's going to continue. And their side is also on the floodplain. So I don't know how accurately they've been able to track exactly how high the river gets on their side, how much of the river is going to impact their piles. I recognize that it's a needed business for them to have, but they need to try to put it in a less environmentally sensitive area. That river we're Grand Rapids. We're the Grand River, and we share that. So I appreciate your concern in letting us know about that, but I would encourage you to not grant the variance for this project and let them find a better place that would be better suited for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I'll let you talk.
So I hesitate to bring this up because I know we are one of many families, but just, yeah. Anyway, my son was born 11 weeks early, and he gets a cold, and we give him his inhaler every 2 hours for fear of his airway being, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but he can't clear his airway just because of the irritants caused by the cold. So as I listen to these arguments about the dust from the concrete, I am very concerned for him. When the second I smell the asphalt plant, I shut all the windows, we don't play outside. Living in the area has already been very difficult for my young family. So I just wanted to add that as one of my concerns.
Okay, thank you. All right. Moving on. Okay, well, I'm going to, I think it's deferred.
Mr. Chair, can I
Sure.
give a suggestion? Just something to consider. You've heard a lot of good comments tonight from both the applicant and the adjacent residents. It's also getting late. I think it's within your purview if you want to digest some of this information. If you think there are some loose ends that you want some more information on, you certainly have the right to table, but if you do that, please request some additional information to come back with to make a better decision at the next opportunity. That being said, there was a lot of information provided tonight. If you think you're
That's
ready
correct.
to deliberate, I encourage you to start deliberating and see where you end up.
Okay. Well, so can I turn over to the board, get some questions answered, I guess?
Absolutely, yep.
Okay. Okay, with that, I'll open the questions to the board. And for the, Mr. Katerberg, Verhaeg, I'm sorry.
I hear the concerns about dust, and the contractors that we work with to crush the concrete all have to be approved by the DEQ. And they have a water system that goes in their crushing machine, and there is virtually no dust that comes from the crushing operation. In working through the working session here with the city, the areas that we're going to do to prepare this area would be done with asphalt millings, which are a wonderful product, and they create almost no dust from traffic on the roads and in the areas that we're doing it in. The areas we're planning to use as well are above the 100-year floodplain. And in 2013, we had about an 80-year flood, and these areas were still well above the water line. So there's just some additional information for you.
Okay, thank you.
Before you leave, can I ask just one
Mr.
question, Mr. Verhaeg? Why this piece of property?
This piece of property
You know
was
it's only 11.1 acres, and you know that our variance is at 20.
Yeah. Well, I think to look at this, from our point of view, we saw it as a heavy industrial zoning. So that's the way it's zoned right now. The only thing that didn't fit was the 20 acres in Walker. There are plenty of acres in Walker and Plainfield together. So
Why didn't you choose that area then?
why that area?
Why didn't you choose the one where you have over 30 acres?
Because that's in the floodplain and floodway. Nothing can happen there. The area
This
looks
is the
really.
only piece of property that you could do this business on.
Yeah. Yes, it is, yep. The area looks good. It looks really usable. We have the rowing association down at the other end, but that building is built in the floodplain with DEQ approval, and actually, when the river gets high, the water runs through the building. And that's what happened in 2013. So we have just a limited area there that's above the 100-year floodplain. And that's the only area that we can use to do something like this.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask one question as well? Where do you do this today?
Pardon?
Where do you do this operation today?
We had done it on Michigan Street where we were, but we we cannot do it in the area where we are because it ended up being a residential zoning. So we did it not knowing that it was residential. We were always thinking we were agricultural, which is primarily our operation. And so we cannot no longer do it there.
And that's the only area that you did it before? So this is like brand new?
Mm-hmm.
What, I have lots of questions. I don't want to table this. I have
I don't wanna table it either.
lots of questions. So I appreciate all the comments and questions and concerns. As I'm looking at this, water flow is going south. So a lot of the residents from Briggs have come up. I'm certain there's residents even further south that may have concern from runoff. I know the DEQ is continuing to reevaluate what 100-year floodplain is because in the past 10 years, we've had 2 of them. So it's not really 100 years anymore. What's the max decibel level of the crushing equipment today that's been measured?
I don't know.
What are the hours of operation that you've done today?
We have worked from 7 in the morning until 5:30 at night, normal business hours.
Do you have any overtime during the periods of September to December?
September to December.
Yep.
There's overtime hours that are worked, but we would work within the parameters that we had to.
Okay. So there's potential that that work could go longer than normal operations based upon what you've done
Well,
today?
not longer than 7 till 5:30, which also includes overtime.
Okay.
Greg, if I can,
Please.
sorry, if I can jump in, Mr. Chair and Craig, just to step in on that particular question. There is an operational limit from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. I don't know if we've gotten into that in much detail for this request, but that would be assumed as part of their, if they get to a next step of review, as part of that review.
The two, there's a lot of reasons why I would ask those 2 questions is, you look at the decibel level, so traffic at 131 is 70 decibels. I don't know what it is today. If it's been measured, I'd like to know what that decibel level is and how long that carries based upon what the residents are. If it's going to go into the overtime, there's potential, October and November, there's no leaves on the trees. As I look outside, the trees are bare, so there's no foliage to block sound, period. So there's those 2 concerns about the carrying of the sound at a 300-foot decibel. I just don't see that stopping. It's going to carry. Prevailing winds are coming out of the northwest, and it's going to carry further, and it's going to go over the floodplain. My other question is, as I look at the logistics of the material being dropped off to get to the 10,000 pound or 10,000 cubic yards of material to start the operation, where's that traffic coming to and from off of either 131 West River Drive and I forget the other road that's there? How are you getting that material there logistically?
Well, I'm sure it would come either way on West River Road, either off of Ann Street exit or the West River exit, from there onto North Park Street, and then to our driveway.
So that traffic volume is going to increase sound as well. And
During your hours of operation, if I can.
Go, please.
Gather your thoughts. During your time of operation, Do you have just one period, 1 hour that you do the crushing? Or does that go from 7 in the morning until 5 at night?
It might go from 8 in the morning till 5 at night, something like that.
Okay, so it could be like every hour is that happen, or is it a constant?
Well, it would just be constantly running from 8 in the morning, let's say, till 5 at night. And we would do that for a period during the year for 4 to 6 weeks only. It's not a continual operation like it's across the street from us.
So when you're doing that crushing, how high are those piles going to be? I know we have a limit, but how high are you going to take it to those limits?
We propose to go 30 feet, which is 5 foot less than what's
Than
permitted.
what we're asking?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Is a third party you're bringing in to do the crushing?
Yes, we bring in a subcontractor and they do the crushing.
Okay.
And we, in our experience over the last few years that we've done it, many of the neighbors in our area didn't even know we were doing it. It's amazingly quiet. You think it's a real noisy operation, and there is some noise, no question, but it's really not nearly as noisy as what you'd think.
Anything else? Do you feel we have information? Do we need to table it to get additional information? I mean,
What additional information would we need?
I'm not real familiar with that kind of process myself.
I have a comment too about those asphalt millings. He declared that they were very low dust. He wants to use them as dry. A year or two back, there was an article of some small community in Michigan that they had paved their road with asphalt millings. And aside from the terrible black dust they were cleaning up out of their house a lot, there were issues with their pets eating hair, and they were having health issues. Asphalt is not a safe product to have as a small finite particle in making dust.
That was the product that was recommended by the city of Walker that we use. I don't know if they're aware of all that. but-
Regular gravel or pavement seems like a safer, more environmentally, high traffic, a lot of traffic and heavy trucks on it.
We'll like put down whatever we're told.
Mr. Chair, do you want, just if I can shed a little bit of light on that particular question, we are always looking for materials that are not roadable and do not kick up dust. So I think we're open to suggestions in terms of the actual paving material to meet those standards. The preferred method is, hard asphalt or hard concrete surface, but we try to be flexible and allow people to pitch ideas for a crushed material like a crushed concrete or a crushed asphalt if it meets those standards of not being producing dust and not being erodible. So that's where it comes in as a paving material. As something in terms of the crushing and the milling itself, we don't weigh in as much on that from an environmental standpoint.
So one thing we gotta get past is the 20-acre requirement.
That's the
That's the
only one.
variance.
Yeah, I know,
That's
that's,
the only one.
well, exactly, and we haven't really talked about that yet, so. I mean, it's
I
been
was
about
wondering-
dust and everything else, but
Why ask him about why this particular property when it's only 11 acres and he has properties that have a lot more acreage that he could do this on? And he said that because they're in a floodplain. Isn't that correct?
I'm sitting back there listening. I don't think you two are on the same page. Caterburg-Verhaeghe does not have some other property somewhere else that's 30 acres. If that's what you're thinking we said. This contiguous property here between Walker and Plainfield is 30 acres. But the city does not allow the property in Plainfield to be included toward that 20-acre minimum, even though there is property there. That's what we're talking about here, okay? There's not some other property somewhere else where this can be done that Caterburg Verhaeg owns.
Okay, thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Talking about the entire yellow outline is roughly 30 acres.
So I understand it right, that a significant portion of that is unusable. That's what Mr. Verhey was saying earlier, is that I have trouble understanding how that would even be counted if it were a continuous property. It's unusable space, it's below the water line. So it sounds like it keeps shrinking by the day.
Jan, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
If he only has 11 acres on the Walker side, how many acres does he have on the, what is it, Plainfield Township side?
There are roughly 11 acres in that really thick yellow line. There are an additional somewhere around 5, I'm looking at their sheet now, 5.3 acres that are still in Walker, but not for this proposed use. That's what the Greenleaf Landscaping is on. And then on the other side of the line, there are, let's see, roughly 13.8 acres in Plainfield Township. So that's where all 5 of those parcels combined, roughly 30 acres. So around 13, 14 in Plainfield, or less than 20 in Walker.
What does Plainfield Township require of them? If we require 20 acres, what do they require?
Yeah, we've coordinated with them, and the approach that we've been advised to take by the city attorney and in coordination with them is that if they were to propose to combine their lots with Plainfield, then we would integrate the 2 requirements. But then we can't allow that because of the way municipal taxing works. So we can't assess property, we can't combine those properties because they're in different taxing jurisdictions. My feedback from the Plainfield Charter Township planner is that there is a lesser setback from their, what they call their rural preservation district, which covers some of their property farther north into the site. And they meet that setback threshold. I think it's between 1 and 500 feet, somewhere thereabouts for the distance from the crushing and the piles. But their standards don't really apply because this is all on our side of the line.
Okay. Thank you.
So none of this operation will be on the Plainfield side of the line?
That's right.
Okay.
Is there a basis for combining lots?
On our side?
On our side.
I would prefer to see that in any case where you have a use that's run by one owner or one operator. Might as well have all the properties associated with that use combined. Just makes things more straightforward from a record-keeping standpoint and allows this one site to be kind of bound together going forward, rather than what you might worry about in the future is if half the lot sells, or you may be looking at intensifying the use even further if other uses grow on that second lot. Not that we wouldn't check for that if there was somebody else coming in with a different site plan for half of this site. But it still just makes it cleaner to go forward with, to have one lot instead of 2 for one use.
Any questions, or we got enough information to make a?
I just have some thoughts in my mind or doubts in my head regarding the subcontractor, and I'm not sure I have my mind wrapped around how this guy is certified or trained, or with this company. Did you say DEQ trained or just trained or some licensed? How does this work?
Both of the subcontractors that we use do this for a business, full-time.
Okay.
And they're all approved by the DEQ for what they do. Every site is a little different, but primarily it works with dust control.
So would they have data for us, noise data, dust data?
I don't know.
Okay. Are these the same gentlemen, the same subcontractor that you use at your other location on Michigan?
Mhm.
And if we were to walk over there and ask some of the neighbors over there about the dust and the noise and that, you're telling me you would have a pretty positive response from the neighborhood there?
I think so.
Well, I'm hearing two different camps emerge. I'm sorry, I keep jumping in, but I'm just trying to keep things moving along. I'm hearing the opinion that there are a lot of facts on the record here and enough to make a decision on. If you make a decision, it's still going to come down to those 4 findings of fact for
Correct.
dimensional variance criteria. There are also a lot of good questions being asked for which maybe you heard enough, maybe you need more information to make sure those questions are answered. Things like the operational standards of the subcontractor, it sounds like that's something you could use some follow-up information for, or maybe not. But just putting it out there again, if you are inclined to make a decision, go to those 4 findings of fact and go through each one of them. If you'd like more information to inform your decision, you can always ask me to follow up and get more information and come back at a later meeting date.
You guys want to run through the findings of fact, or you have enough information to?
I think we should go through the finding of facts, see if we come to.
Anything different?
Close the public hearing.
Oh, yeah, you close the public hearing.
Okay, motion to close the hearing,
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
or
I'll support.
Pat? All in favor of closing the hearing?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing's closed. Okay. Exceptional or extraordinary circumstances, that there's exceptional or ordinary circumstances or conditions applying to the property in question as to the intended use of the property that do not apply to generally to other properties in the same zoning district.
I personally don't see it on that one alone. I don't see it's extraordinary and extraordinary. That is the lot size, that's the border of Walker, it is what it is, and, you know, the river is the river, and the freeway is the freeway. There's nothing extraordinary about the lot in Walker.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think we have to stay within the confines of the Walker ordinance, and the ordinance in Walker says 20 acres. In Walker, he has, you know, only 11 acres, and, you know, to me, there's just not enough justification to make it exceptional or extraordinary just based on that alone.
I also agree that I don't feel that it's exceptional or extraordinary circumstances in this case.
Well, I disagree. I think it's pretty exceptional that these pieces are contiguous, and it's because the city's line is there, doesn't mean that he can't enjoy the privilege that he has in Walker to develop his property the way he sees fit, as a business plan. So I think that that whole 30 acres there should be applicable to our zoning ordinance under that industrial site that we have there.
But if it's all condensed on the Walker side, the whole operation.
Well, I know, but we do that all the time with development, with stormwater stuff too. We make developers put all their stuff in one area because we need detention, we need buffers, we need landscaping zones, we need things like that. So we require them to do that. So he comes forward and does it, and now we say he can't do that. I guess
Well,
that
he went
is-
to Planning Commission, and Planning Commission had him come to us because of that fact.
Right, and then it's gonna go back to planning commission so they can control it after that, if we were to approve this.
That's if we
One
were to
correction,
approve.
they started a planning commission application process. They have not been to our planning commission yet. They come to the ZBA before they go to planning commission.
All right.
Okay, preservation of rights, that such a variance is necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of a substantial property right similar to that possessed by other properties in the same zoning district and in the vicinity. The possibility of increased financial return shall not of itself be deemed sufficient to warrant a variance.
So Dan, this is where I would look to you for a question, because the way I'm struggling with interpreting the ordinance. Is the ordinance saying that one business that does this needs to have 20 acres? Or if I have 4 businesses, that I could cram 4 businesses and kind of marry the rules together? Right, so,
That's a good question. The ordinance is gonna say that you have to have, the 20 acres has to be assigned to one use, and that could be different business operators economically facilitating that one use together, if that's what you're getting at. But the Greenleaf Landscaping is one business, and then this is a separate use.
I said 4, I meant 3. The third being the boathouse. Whether or not it's a business or not, it's an operation of some sort.
Yeah, I would try to box in that as a separate use that wouldn't apply to the same acreage.
Okay, no detriment. Authorizing such a variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property and will not materially impair the intent or purpose of this chapter or the public interest. I think we kind of heard that.
That's kind of clear as day.
Yeah,
I think that
we
was
heard that over
clear.
and over.
Yep.
I kind of couple this with the 20 acres. If there's a 20-acre minimum, it sounds like that's designed to also accommodate buffer. So really it seems like the operation couldn't encompass edge to edge of the 20 acres. So for me, when we're constricting it down to something less than 20 acres, you kind of lose that opportunity to add buffer. And then to go back to the contiguous properties, it's fine to connect them to come up with something that's greater than 20. But together, does it really give you an opportunity to create the buffer?
If I could jump in again, that's a really good point too. On the one hand, the 20 acres is meant to provide a palette for you to have a high-intensity use that's surrounded by a lot of land. There are other standards that the applicant did mention they were going to meet in terms of required separation from residential property. And there's a table of setbacks associated with this use if and when it gets to the planning commission that apply to side lot lines, pile heights, buffers from the lot lines that they'd still be expected to meet if they get to that stage. So you can look at those standards. You can also look at the 20 acres as something that you'd still want to apply to the overall site to make sure there's extra buffering.
Okay, not a general problem. That the condition or situation of the piece of property or the intended use of such property for which the variance is sought is not of so general or recurrent a nature as to make it reasonably practicable for the formulation of a general regulation for such condition or situation. Okay, so that's our criteria, and
So just to confirm, we have to say to grant a variance, it has to meet all 4 criteria.
correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Anyone care to make a motion?
Might be a good idea to do a straw poll again and based on the majority opinion, make the motion that way, whether it's approve or deny or table.
Okay. Start with Tom.
Deny.
Craig?
Deny.
Andy?
Approve.
Deny.
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 So,
then somebody would read a motion to that effect.
I'll make a motion to deny the request by owner Caterberg for Hague Incorporated to perform mineral processing and material storage as defined in section 94-5 of the City of Walker zoning ordinance on 2 different properties with a total area of roughly 11.7 acres which is contrary to section 94-254A, 1A of the Walker zoning ordinance, which requires a minimum of 20 acres for this land use at the subject's lots located at 231 and 271 North Park Street, Northeast, based on the findings of fact derived from section 94-59 of the Walker zoning ordinance.
Do I hear a second?
I'll support.
Support by Craig. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Randy? It's denied.
Okay.
Sorry, Dan, I thought it went to the planning commission already. I keep forgetting that it comes
The
here first.
planning commission process, and that's actually an item I'll talk about with Mr. Verhaeg. We've already set up their scheduling and sequencing with their application fee. That's sort of the cost of doing business, but I want to make sure we're fair to them and pull back whatever we can from that. I'll see if I can still pull back the ad because it was set up for December. So I'll see what I can do about that.
All right. That would be good. Thank you. Any other business?
Very difficult job tonight. I want to commend the chair. And,
Good job, Brian.
there's a bit of a,
We didn't get sued. Yeah.
I want to commend you for what you did, and there's some curveballs with that second case as well, and I probably should have stepped in sooner than I did with that, so apologize. Craig, you got the heat for that.
He gave you the evil eye.
What is coming up next?
One second, we gotta
Know that
close it
we
up.
have a variance request in mid-December for somebody to have I think it's just a parking variance for related to having auto sales and continuing an auto shop on Remembrance.
Okay.
So I think that's the only one we have scheduled for December.
Motion to adjourn?
I make that motion.
Sandra? Or by Scott? Pat, I'm sorry.
I do support
You
it
can
too.
come up if you want.
Hi. Yeah, you hit complete.
Oh.